Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. In 1977, near the town of Karasuk in the Novosibirsk region of Russia, a local mushroom picker stumbled upon a gruesome scene that would soon capture the attention of law enforcement and haunt the collective memory of the community. Deep within a secluded forest, he found a hidden section of land that revealed a horrific secret, a clandestine graveyard containing the dismembered bodies of 48 adolescents and young adults. The discovery was as chilling as it was macabre. All the bodies were found naked, showing unmistakable signs of brutal torture inflicted before death. It was evident that the victims had suffered immensely, enduring unspeakable horrors. The makeshift graves, some barely covered by a thin layer of soil, hinted at a methodical and prolonged spree of violence, spanning an entire decade. Each grave told a story of unimaginable pain, with the victims meeting their end under circumstances far removed from natural causes. The investigation unveiled a decade-long nightmare, with the graves appearing gradually over the years. Authorities were perplexed by the systematic manner in which the bodies were disposed of and the sheer brutality involved. It was clear that the perpetrator, or perpetrators, operated with a sinister precision, selecting, abducting, and murdering their victims before discarding them in this remote, forgotten corner of the forest. As news of the secret graveyard spread, the local community was plunged into a state of fear and disbelief. The realization that such atrocities could occur undetected for so long sparked outrage and a desperate demand for answers. Parents clutched their children tighter, and the woods, once a source of sustenance and peace, became a symbol of terror and loss. Despite extensive investigations, many questions remained unanswered. Who were these young victims? What drove their murderer to commit such heinous acts? And why did it take so long for the authorities to uncover this hidden horror? The forest near Karasuk, once a place of serene natural beauty, became a silent witness to the darkest facets of human cruelty. The story of the hidden graveyard near Karasuk stands as a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk in the shadows and the relentless pursuit of justice for those whose lives were so cruelly taken. The moment the hidden graveyard was discovered, the case was immediately shrouded in secrecy. High-ranking investigators from Moscow swiftly took control of the investigation, ensuring that the details remained tightly guarded. Local authorities, including the narrator's uncle who was a part of the police force, were granted limited access to the information. This imposition of secrecy created an air of mystery and speculation, with the local community left in the dark about the full extent of the horrors uncovered. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case was the origin of the bodies. In Karasuk, there hadn't been a significant number of reported disappearances of teenagers and young adults. Most missing person cases in the area had plausible explanations and were resolved without incident. This fact complicated the investigation, as it seemed unlikely that the victims were from the immediate vicinity. Investigators considered the possibility that the bodies had been transported from other regions. This theory, however, did not hold up under scrutiny. There were no records or evidence to suggest a large-scale operation moving bodies into the Karasuk forest. The lack of logistical traces such as transportation records, sightings, or reports of suspicious activity in other areas left the investigators baffled. As the investigation dragged on, the chilling enigma of the hidden graveyard deepened. With no clear leads on the victims' origins, theories began to swirl. Were these victims part of an underground network of trafficked individuals? Was there a sadistic cult operating under the radar? Or was there a lone, elusive serial killer with a penchant for unimaginable cruelty? For the residents of Karasuk, the pervasive secrecy and lack of information fostered a climate of fear and suspicion. Whispers of conspiracy and dark forces at play circulated through the town, amplifying the horror of the situation. Families, especially those who had lost loved ones, were left with a gnawing sense of unease, unable to find closure or comprehend the scale of the tragedy. Despite the high-profile involvement and extensive investigation, the case of the Karasuk graveyard remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Russian criminal history. The questions about the origins of the bodies, the identity of the killer or killers, and the motives behind such brutality remain unanswered, leaving a dark, haunting legacy in the annals of true crime. The forest near Karasuk, once a symbol of natural beauty, now stands as a grim monument to the unknown victims and the unspeakable horrors they endured. The story serves as a chilling reminder of the evil that can exist in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The process of identifying the victims discovered in the Karasuk forest proved to be an immense challenge, adding another layer of complexity to an already bewildering investigation. The bodies, many in advanced stages of decomposition, presented significant obstacles for forensic experts. Without clear identifiers, the task of matching remains to missing persons became an arduous, often impossible, endeavor. Compounding the difficulty, the majority of the bodies could not be identified due to the severe state of decomposition. The killers had meticulously ensured that no traces of their identity or their methods were left behind. The lack of personal belongings, identification documents, or distinctive markings on the victims further hampered the identification efforts. Moreover, the elements had conspired to erase potential clues. Harsh weather conditions, including heavy rains and fluctuating temperatures, had degraded what little evidence might have existed. The forest floor, damp and overgrown, swallowed footprints and any other physical traces that could have provided leads. Time, too, had played its part in obliterating critical forensic evidence. The investigation reached a grim impasse. Without the ability to identify the victims, authorities struggled to piece together the victims' last moments or understand the full scope of the crime. Families of missing persons remained in agonizing suspense, uncertain whether their loved ones were among the dead or still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. The crime scene itself, devoid of clues, stood in eerie silence. Investigators scoured the area for any sign, any minute detail that could break the case open. But the killers had been thorough, leaving behind a scene so meticulously cleansed that it seemed almost otherworldly in its lack of evidence. The weight of uncertainty bore heavily on the investigative team. The absence of clear leads and identifiable victims meant that the motive, the method, and the perpetrators remained elusive. Each unidentified body represented not just a life lost, but a mystery unresolved, a piece of the puzzle missing. The legacy of the Karasuk graveyard remains one of haunting ambiguity. The unidentified bodies serve as silent witnesses to the horrors inflicted upon them, their stories untold and their killers unpunished. The forest, once a place of quiet natural beauty, now harbors the echoes of unanswered questions and unavenged souls. The discovery near Karasuk stands as a testament to the depths of human cruelty and the enduring quest for justice in the face of overwhelming odds. It is a dark chapter in true crime history, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that still lurk in the shadows, waiting to be brought to light. Investigators, desperate for a breakthrough, decided to stake out the crime scene, hoping the killer would return. They believed that the perpetrator might be drawn back to the site, either to revisit the horrors of their deeds or to dispose of more victims. For several years, law enforcement maintained a vigilant watch over the clearing, ensuring that it remained under constant surveillance. During this period, they detained numerous mushroom pickers who accidentally wandered too close to the guarded area, adding to the sense of mystery and fear surrounding the forest. In an effort to glean more information, the bodies were transported to Moscow for thorough forensic examination. The aim was to uncover any hidden clues that might have been missed and to identify the victims if possible. Unfortunately, the state of the remains and the lack of identifiable features made this task exceedingly difficult. Once the examinations were complete, the bodies were buried in anonymous graves, leaving their identities and stories buried with them. In 1982, a shocking crime sent further ripples of fear through the already tense community. The first secretary of the city party committee, Shavlev, and his wife were brutally murdered at their summer house. The crime was initially baffling, given Shavlev's high-profile status and the seeming lack of motive. The investigation into the murders of Shavlev and his wife uncovered a tragic and disturbing truth. The perpetrator was Shavlev's own cousin, Protopopov, who suffered from severe mental illness. Protopopov, unable to comprehend the gravity of his actions, had committed the murders in a fit of unhinged violence. He was quickly apprehended, but due to his mental state, he was declared legally insane. Consequently, he was sent to a psychiatric institution for mandatory treatment rather than facing a traditional trial. The brutal slaying of such a prominent figure as Shevelev compounded the community's sense of insecurity and dread. It seemed that violence and mystery were inescapable, with both the unsolved horrors of the forest and the shocking familial betrayal of the party secretary's murder weighing heavily on the public consciousness. Despite the investigators' best efforts, the killer or killers responsible for the forest graveyard were never caught. The stakeout yielded no results, and the case gradually grew cold. The unidentified bodies remained nameless, and the true scope of the atrocities committed in the forest near Karasuk continued to elude the authorities. The events near Karasuk and the murder of Shevelev left an indelible mark on the region's history. The forest clearing, once a place of natural beauty, became a somber symbol of hidden evil and unresolved tragedy. The story of these crimes stands as a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the shadows that can linger over a community for decades. The unresolved nature of these cases and the haunting silence of the victims' unspoken stories continue to evoke a profound sense of unease and sorrow, underscoring the relentless pursuit of justice and the enduring mysteries that still reside in the darkest corners of human experience. In 2005, a series of articles in the local Karasuk newspaper reignited interest in the eerie forest, but this time for a different reason. Residents had long spoken of seeing mysterious yellow spheres in the woods, a phenomenon dating back to the 1950s. These glowing orbs were described as silent and elusive, darting away whenever someone tried to approach them. The articles collected various accounts from local inhabitants who had witnessed the yellow spheres. The common descriptions painted a picture of luminescent, spherical objects hovering or moving close to the ground. Their silent presence added to their otherworldly nature, and their tendency to retreat swiftly when approached only deepened the enigma. Some described them as the size of a football, while others claimed they were as large as a beach ball. Speculation about the nature of these spheres ranged from the supernatural to the scientific. Some locals believed the spheres were spirits or otherworldly beings, their silent, glowing forms a manifestation of the paranormal. Others thought they might be advanced technology or a natural phenomenon not yet understood by science. Experts weighed in on the mystery. With a more grounded theory, the yellow spheres could be a rare form of ball lightning. The forest near Karasuk was frequently struck by lightning, which lent credibility to this hypothesis. Ball lightning is a poorly understood and rare atmospheric phenomenon, where glowing, spherical objects are sometimes observed during thunderstorms. These objects can vary in size and color, and their behavior often defies easy explanation, matching many of the characteristics described by the Karasuk residents. The reports of yellow spheres retreating silently when approached might also align with the behavior of ball lightning, which is known to move unpredictably and disappear abruptly. The glowing nature and the lack of sound further supported this scientific explanation. Although ball lightning is typically associated with thunderstorms, its erratic and elusive nature has made it difficult to study and understand fully. The publication of these articles added another layer of mystery to the already dark and haunting reputation of the Karasuk forest. The community, still grappling with the unresolved horrors of the discovered graveyard and the murder of Shevelev, now had to contend with this eerie phenomenon. The yellow spheres, whether supernatural or scientific, deepened the forest's enigma, making it a focal point of both fear and fascination. The glowing yellow spheres in Karasuk's forest were not only observed during thunderstorms but also under clear skies, both during the day and at night. This peculiarity caught the attention of researchers, as the frequency and conditions of these sightings were highly unusual for ball lightning, which is typically associated with stormy weather. The frequent reports of these yellow spheres intrigued investigators. Witnesses described seeing the spheres often, their presence seemingly indifferent to the weather conditions. This high frequency of sightings was a statistical anomaly, especially given the conventional understanding of ball lightning as a rare phenomenon. Karasuk itself appeared to be a hotspot for unusual electrical activity. The town experienced an abnormally high number of lightning strikes, particularly in the forested areas. This anomaly extended to the frequent appearances of the yellow spheres, creating a compelling, if unsettling, pattern. Most of the incidents occurred within a 2 to 3 kilometer radius in the northern forests of Karasuk. This area included the private sector, where the Shevelevs had their summer house, adding a layer of eerie connection between the tragic murders and the strange phenomena. Researchers, both local and from afar, became fascinated by Karasuk's unusual electrical activity. The statistical anomaly of frequent lightning strikes and yellow sphere sightings prompted scientific inquiries into the region's atmospheric and geological conditions. Hypotheses ranged from unique mineral compositions in the soil to underground electrical currents that could influence such phenomena. For the residents of Karasuk, the frequent sightings of these mysterious spheres added to their sense of unease. The forest, already shadowed by the grisly discovery of the hidden graveyard and the tragic murder of Shevelev and his wife, now harbored another enigma. The glowing orbs, appearing without warning and moving silently, fed into local legends and fears. The northern forest of Karasuk, with its high incidence of lightning strikes and frequent sightings of yellow spheres, became a focal point of mystery and dread. The combination of scientific curiosity and supernatural speculation turned the area into a subject of intense debate and study. In 1992, the quiet town of Karasuk was shaken when 9-year-old Sergei went missing. For 9 agonizing days, his family and the local community searched frantically for him, fearing the worst. To everyone's astonishment, Sergei returned home unscathed and not even hungry, with an incredible story about his disappearance. Sergei's adventure began innocuously enough. He had wandered into the forest, chasing after a chipmunk and a woodpecker. In his pursuit, he became disoriented and lost his way. As he wandered deeper into the woods, he stumbled upon something strange and unexpected. Sergei recounted how he crossed a fence made of stakes adorned with colorful cloth strips. This peculiar barrier seemed to serve as a boundary, but no one in the town knew of its existence. The fence, seemingly ancient and hidden deep within the forest, added an air of mystery to his tale. Sergei's memory of what happened next was hazy. He spoke of a place beyond the fence that felt different, almost magical. He described meeting kind but silent beings who took care of him, providing him with food and shelter. Despite the oddness of his story, Sergei was insistent about the details, and his calm demeanor suggested he truly believed what he was saying. When Sergei reappeared after 9 days, he showed no signs of exposure or malnutrition, which would be expected after such a long time in the wild. His condition puzzled everyone, from his family to the investigators. How could a young boy survive in the dense forest for over a week without any physical effects? Sergei's tale sparked a flurry of speculation and investigation. The fence he described could not be found, and the beings he mentioned remained a mystery. Some believed he had encountered a hidden community, or perhaps had stumbled upon a secret refuge. Others thought his story was a child's fantasy, a coping mechanism for a traumatic experience. However, his healthy state upon return lent an air of credibility to his account that was hard to dismiss entirely. The townspeople of Karasuk were left in a state of wonder and fear. Sergei's story added to the growing list of strange and unexplainable events associated with the forest. The area, already infamous for its mysterious yellow spheres and the hidden graveyard, now had another layer of enigma. As Sergei ventured deeper into the forest, he stumbled upon a settlement consisting of tents and people speaking in an unfamiliar language. The residents, while resembling fair-haired, blue-eyed Russians, were dressed differently and appeared greatly alarmed by his sudden appearance. Despite their physical similarities to Russians, the clothing and demeanor of the settlement's inhabitants set them apart. They seemed to be from a different time or culture, and their perplexed reactions to Sergei's presence only added to the mystery surrounding them. Sergei attempted to communicate with the residents, but their language was unintelligible to him. Their speech was unlike anything he had ever heard, further deepening the sense of otherworldliness about them. Just as Sergei's encounter with the unknown people seemed poised to yield answers, the transcript of his testimony abruptly ends. This sudden cessation suggests either the loss of the document or the cessation of recording due to the authorities' skepticism towards Sergei's account, dismissing it as mere childish fantasy. The discontinuation of the transcript hints at the skepticism and distrust that permeated the investigation into Sergei's disappearance. The authorities, perhaps unwilling to entertain the possibility of extraordinary occurrences, may have dismissed Sergei's story as implausible or unreliable. With the abrupt end of the transcript, any hope of gaining insight into Sergei's mysterious encounter with the unknown people is lost. Whether his tale was a figment of imagination or a glimpse into an alternate reality remains a haunting question, buried within the shadows of Karasuk's dark and enigmatic history. The sole source of further information about Sergei's disappearance is a sensationalistic article in a Moscow newspaper of dubious credibility. The article is characterized by embellished metaphors and blatant fabrications, rendering it highly unreliable as a source of accurate information. Sergei spent a week in the settlement, where he was provided with food and care, but kept at a distance from the residents. Despite their apparent concern for his well-being, they maintained a guarded stance, forbidding him from interacting with the other children. The people he encountered spoke in an incomprehensible language, yet bore a striking physical resemblance to Russians. The residents of the settlement remained shrouded in mystery. While they resembled Russians in appearance, their attire and behavior suggested a distinct cultural or temporal divergence. Their refusal to allow Sergei to integrate into their community, coupled with their enigmatic language and demeanor, deepened the sense of intrigue surrounding them. Sergei's inability to communicate with the residents, combined with their deliberate isolation of him from their social sphere, heightened the sense of alienation and disorientation he experienced during his time in the settlement. Despite their apparent care for his physical well-being, their reluctance to engage with him on a deeper level left him feeling isolated and perplexed. On the final day of his stay in the settlement, Sergei encountered a tall individual whose sudden appearance added another layer of intrigue to his already puzzling experience. This enigmatic figure offered Sergei a strange concoction to drink, after which the boy lost consciousness. The beverage given to Sergei by the mysterious tall visitor had an immediate and potent effect, causing him to black out. The nature and purpose of this concoction remained shrouded in mystery, leaving unanswered questions about the intentions of the stranger who administered it. Upon regaining consciousness, Sergei found himself alone in the forest, disoriented and bewildered by the events that had transpired. His sudden return to consciousness amidst the dense foliage only added to the surreal and unsettling nature of his experience. Despite official assertions that Sergei's disappearance was merely the result of aimless wandering in the forest, the full transcript of his testimony, archived and preserved, tells a different story. This unofficial version of events diverges significantly from the official narrative, suggesting that there may be more to Sergei's ordeal than meets the eye. The complete transcript of Sergei's testimony, stored away in the archives, holds clues to the true nature of his disappearance and subsequent return. Within its pages lie hints of a deeper, more mysterious reality, one that challenges the simplistic explanations put forth by official sources. Protopopov's diary, meticulously maintained during his time in the psychiatric hospital, offers a glimpse into the troubled mind of its author. Filled with simple entries and references to the events that led to his confinement, the diary provides valuable insights into Protopopov's mental state and the circumstances surrounding his hospitalization. Upon his release from the psychiatric hospital, Maslayev, still struggling with his own mental health issues, was entrusted with Protopopov's diary. Acting as a caretaker and confidant, Maslayev took on the responsibility of safeguarding the diary and ensuring its contents were preserved. Believing it to be a final request from his deceased friend, Maslayev submitted Protopopov's diary to the police in Novosibirsk. The diary's arrival at the law enforcement agency drew the attention of an archivist familiar with the case of Shevelev, as well as the uncle of the diary's author. The discovery of Protopopov's diary within the police archives sparked curiosity and intrigue, especially given its connection to individuals involved in the Shevelev case. The archivist's familiarity with the uncle of the diary's author hinted at a deeper connection between Protopopov and the events that had transpired in Karasuk. As the contents of Protopopov's diary are examined and analyzed, investigators and researchers alike are hopeful that it may shed light on the dark and enigmatic circumstances surrounding the Shevelev case. With its potential to uncover hidden truths and reveal long-buried secrets, the diary represents a crucial piece of the puzzle in unraveling the tangled web of mysteries that haunt the town of Karasuk. The seemingly innocuous diary, filled with mundane entries like the sun is shining outside, initially found its way to the author's uncle as a curiosity. Intrigued by the contents of the diary belonging to a supposedly insane individual, the author took it upon themselves to decipher the cryptic writings and compare them with the uncle's accounts, sparking their own investigation into the matter. As the author delved deeper into the diary's contents, certain recurring themes and phrases caught their attention. Protopopov, the author of the diary, often repeated mentions of Shavalev and Olya. Savaliva, describing them as malevolent figures who abducted children from the forest, subjected them to torture, and ultimately killed them. Protopopov claimed he was coerced into participating in these atrocities. He confessed to murdering Siva and Olya in an attempt to stop the killings, but the murders persisted, leading him to lament that he was not good for failing to end the atrocities. The diary's chilling revelations painted a gruesome picture of the events that transpired in Karasuk's forest, implicating Shavalev and Savaliva in heinous crimes against innocent children. Protopopov's confessions hinted at a sinister conspiracy, where the perpetrators manipulated him into becoming an accomplice in their depraved acts. Despite Protopopov's desperate attempt to halt the killings by eliminating the supposed instigators, the cycle of violence persisted, leaving him tormented by guilt and self-doubt. Protopopov's admission of his own culpability and his anguished cries for redemption added a tragic dimension to the unfolding horror. His belief that he was not good reflected his profound sense of remorse and helplessness in the face of unspeakable evil. The diary's revelations served as a haunting testament to the depths of human depravity and the torment of those ensnared in its grip. Protopopov's diary entries painted a chilling picture of the atrocities committed by Shavalev and Savaliva. According to Protopopov's accounts, the duo would lure children from the forest, imprison them in a room downstairs, subject them to torture, and ultimately kill them. The most horrifying detail was their alleged act of drinking the victim's blood. Despite Protopopov's sympathy for the children, he felt powerless to help them, leading him to commit the murders of the Shavalevs in a desperate bid to stop the killings. The discovery of the victims' bodies in the clearing, not far from the Shavalev summer house, provided a chilling link to the alleged crimes. The proximity of the burial site to the Shavalevs' residence lent credibility to Protopopov's claims of their involvement. Furthermore, the timing of the burials, dating back to 1977, predating Protopopov's purported cessation of the murders in 1982, added weight to his assertions. It suggested a timeline consistent with the period when the killings were believed to have occurred, strengthening the case against the Shavalevs as the perpetrators. The period of relative calm following the discovery of the mass grave in 1977 can be attributed to Shavalev's position as the first secretary of the local party committee. Being privy to the police's stakeout in the clearing, Shavalev likely avoided any suspicious activity until 1982, when the investigation was eventually halted. Protopopov asserted that the victims of the Shavalevs were not local townsfolk but rather children from the forest who spoke an unfamiliar language. This detail adds to the eerie nature of the crimes, suggesting that the victims were outsiders, possibly abducted from distant regions and brought to Karasuk's forest. Their unfamiliar language further emphasizes the strangeness of their origin and hints at a sinister connection to events beyond the town's borders. In the vicinity of the Shavalev's summer house, there have been reports of geomagnetic or other natural anomalies. According to the author's theory, these anomalies may indicate the existence of a passage between worlds through which the Shavalevs abducted their victims. The Shavalevs likely exploited the anomaly to abduct children from another world, confident that they would not be pursued in our realm. Their arrogance and recklessness ultimately led to their downfall when Protopopov, improving his mental state, killed them to halt the killings. In the 1990s, the summer houses, including the one where the Shavalevs committed their crimes, were demolished, replaced by a medical complex. This renders it impossible to investigate the crime scene and continue probing the mysterious disappearances and murders. With the demolition of the summer houses, any hope of uncovering more evidence or unraveling the enigma surrounding the crimes evaporates. The sinister secrets hidden within the walls of those now destroyed structures are lost to time, leaving behind only whispers of horror and unanswered questions. The tale of Karasuk's forest, with its dark past and chilling mysteries, reaches its conclusion, shrouded in the shadows of the past. The year 1946 brought a rare and much-needed peace to Lapland. The war had left scars, but now the silence of the snow-covered forests seemed to heal them. With the German forces having withdrawn, the Russian presence worked tirelessly to rebuild and re-establish order in the region. This particular winter was eerily quiet, almost as if the land itself was in a deep, restorative sleep. The snow draped over the tall pines and blanketed the villages, creating a landscape that could have been pulled from a fairy tale. Yet beneath this picturesque veneer, a different story unfolded, a story steeped in mystery and dread. Olav, the story's central figure, cut a distinctive figure against the pristine whiteness of the Lapland winter. He was not a tall man, but his compact frame was built strong, like the ancient pines that surrounded his village. His cheeks were permanently rosy, a stark contrast to the white expanse around him, and his mustaches were as stiff and unyielding as his demeanor. Olav had a singular passion skiing through the forests. His favorite pastime was to forge new paths through the thick, snow-laden trees, as if he were seeking something or perhaps trying to escape. The villagers regarded Olav with a mixture of fear and suspicion. They whispered that he was a sorcerer, a man who dabbled in dark arts. Children were warned to stay away from him, and adults avoided crossing his path. This mutual enmity was neither hidden nor subtle. It was a palpable, living thing, like the cold that permeated the air. Olav seemed to thrive on this animosity, his piercing eyes often glinting with a knowing, almost mocking light. Despite his unsettling presence, Olav was a fixture in the village. His solitary figure, gliding silently through the forest on his skis, became a familiar, if unnerving, sight. The tracks he left behind in the snow were like the signature of a ghost, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Some said that following these tracks would lead one to unspeakable horrors, to places where the forest turned into a labyrinth of nightmares. In the depths of winter, when the nights were long and the days fleeting, strange things began to happen. Livestock disappeared, and the sounds of mournful howling echoed through the valleys. The villagers could feel the change, a creeping dread that seeped into their bones. They began to see Olav's solitary journeys as more than just the wanderings of an eccentric loner. Whispers grew louder, and fear took root. It was said that Olav had made a pact with the spirits of the forest, ancient beings that demanded tribute. The very air around his small, isolated cabin seemed charged with a malevolent energy. No one dared to approach, especially not during the dark hours when the northern lights danced eerily in the sky, casting strange shadows on the snow. One particularly frigid night, as a fierce storm battered the village, Olav set out once more on his skis. The villagers, huddled in their homes, watched through frosted windows as his figure disappeared into the swirling snow. Hours passed, and the storm grew fiercer. The howling wind seemed to carry voices, cries of anguish and terror that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard them. When the storm finally abated, the villagers ventured out to find the source of the eerie noises. They followed Olav's ski tracks deep into the forest, deeper than anyone had dared to go before. What they found at the end of the trail froze their hearts more than the winter chill ever could. There, amidst a circle of ancient, twisted trees, lay Olav's broken body, his eyes wide open in a final silent scream. The snow around him was stained dark, and strange symbols were carved into the surrounding trees. The villagers fled, swearing never to speak of what they had seen. Olav's cabin was abandoned, left to decay and be reclaimed by the forest. The tracks that Olav had left in the snow were the last anyone ever saw of him. They said that on certain nights, when the moon was full and the wind howled just right, one could still see his ghostly figure gliding through the trees, a silent reminder of the dark secrets buried deep within the heart of Lapland. Olav's home was a solitary cabin situated 10 kilometers from the nearest village. The cabin was on the edge of an ancient pine forest, where the trees stood tall and ominous, their thick branches casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. This dense forest, with its towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind, formed a natural barrier between Olav and the rest of the world. He preferred it this way, finding solace in the seclusion and the silence. Olav was a man of the old ways. He revered the ancient gods and practiced the traditions of shamanism passed down through generations. His beliefs set him apart from the other villagers, who had largely embraced Christianity. The forest, with its sacred groves and hidden altars, was his temple. Here, he felt a connection to the spirits and the earth, a bond that was as deep and unyielding as the roots of the ancient pines. Living relatively close to Olav, by Lapland's standards, was Grandma Hanili. She was an elderly woman, bent with age but still spry and full of life. Hanili was a fixture in the village, known for her kind heart and unyielding faith. She often trekked the long, snowy path to Olive's cabin, carrying with her small parcels of food, homemade remedies, and an abundance of concern. Despite her warmth, Hanili and Olive shared a contentious relationship. She frequently chided him for his refusal to attend church, her voice filled with a mix of frustration and genuine care. "Olive, you must come to church," she would say, her wrinkled face stern, but her eyes pleading. "The old gods are no comfort. It is the Lord who offers salvation." Olive would listen in silence, his expression unreadable. He respected Hanili's intentions, but remained steadfast in his beliefs. The old gods and the spirits of the forest were his guides, not the distant deity of the church. He found the rituals and the chants of shamanism far more comforting than the hymns and prayers Hanili spoke of. Hanili, despite her exasperation, never gave up on Olive. She would bring him herbs and potions, muttering under her breath about the power of prayer as she handed them over. Olive accepted these offerings with a nod, though he relied more on his own concoctions made from the forest's bounty. As the winter deepened, strange occurrences became more frequent. The villagers, already wary of Olive, began to whisper about the unnatural events that seemed to radiate from the ancient pine forest. Shadows moved where none should, and eerie lights flickered in the darkness. Hanili, despite her faith, felt the creeping dread that pervaded the air. One evening, as a particularly fierce storm raged, Hanili decided to visit Olive. She braved the howling wind and driving snow, clutching a small cross and a vial of holy water. When she arrived, she found Olive sitting by the fire, his expression more troubled than usual. "Olive, something is amiss," she said, her voice shaking. "The village is frightened. We need you to come to church, to pray with us." Olive looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "The forest spirits are restless, Hanili. They sense a disturbance, something ancient and powerful. Your church cannot help with this." Hanili, determined to save Olive's soul, insisted on staying. She spoke of faith and redemption, trying to reach him through words that had always been a comfort to her. But as the night wore on, the storm outside seemed to grow more ferocious, as if responding to some unseen force. In the heart of the storm, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. Olive stood abruptly, his face pale. "Stay here, Hanili. Do not leave this cabin." Ignoring her protests, Olive stepped into the raging storm, his skis cutting through the deep snow with practiced ease. Hanili watched from the window, clutching her cross, praying fervently for his safety. Hours passed, and the storm eventually began to subside. Hanili, unable to contain her worry, ventured outside to search for Olive. She followed his ski tracks into the forest, her heart pounding with fear. She found him at the edge of a sacred grove, surrounded by the ancient pines. Olive lay still, his body broken, his eyes wide with terror. Around him, the snow was marked with strange symbols, and an oppressive silence hung in the air. Hanili, though devastated, understood that the old gods had claimed Olive. She returned to the village, her heart heavy with sorrow and fear. The villagers, seeing her grief-stricken face, knew that something terrible had happened. They never spoke of Olive again, and his cabin was left to the encroaching forest, a silent testament to the old ways and the dark secrets they held. And so the legend of Olive grew, a chilling reminder of the mysterious and often terrifying power of the ancient forest and the man who had dared to live on its outskirts. In his isolated cabin on the edge of the ancient pine forest, Olive performed rituals to honor the old gods. These rites involved offerings of venison and moonshine, laid carefully on makeshift altars deep in the woods. He would chant in the old tongue, calling upon the spirits to grant him their favor and protection. The scent of the offerings mingled with the crisp, cold air, and the flickering flames of his torches cast eerie shadows among the towering pines. One frosty evening, as Olive was finishing one of these rituals, he heard a hesitant knock on his cabin door. Surprised, he opened it to find a woman standing there, bundled against the cold. She introduced herself as Lena, a relative of Hanili's nephew. Her face was pale with worry, and her eyes held a desperate plea. Olav, she began, her voice trembling. I need your help. My son is gravely ill, and the doctors cannot cure him. Hanili's nephew said you might know of a way to save him. Olav regarded Lena with a mix of suspicion and resignation. He had long since ceased to trust the villagers. Their fear and hostility were palpable whenever he neared the village. Shutters would slam shut, and mothers would hurriedly pull their children indoors. Some would even cross themselves, muttering prayers against evil. To them, Olav was not just an outcast, he was a sorcerer, a man in league with dark forces. I do not think I can help, Olav said, his voice gruff. The villagers do not want my aid. They fear me, and with good reason. Lena, however, would not be easily dissuaded. She stepped closer, her desperation overcoming her fear. Please, Olav, my son is dying. If you have any knowledge, any magic that can save him, I beg you to use it. Olav's eyes softened slightly at her plea. Despite his hardened exterior, he was not completely devoid of compassion. He had chosen his solitary life to protect himself from the villagers' scorn, but the woman's anguish stirred something within him. He could sense the sincerity of her request and the love she had for her child. Very well, Olav finally said. I will come to your home and see what I can do. But know this, the villagers will not welcome me, and there may be consequences for you and your family if they find out you sought my help. With that, Olav gathered his supplies and followed Lena through the dark, snow-covered forest. The journey was silent, save for the crunching of their footsteps on the frozen ground. When they reached her home, it was clear that the boy was in a dire state. His feverish body trembled, and his breath came in shallow gasps. Olav set to work immediately, using herbs and concoctions that he had gathered over the years. He chanted softly in the old language, invoking the spirits to lend their aid. As he worked, Lena watched with a mix of hope and fear. The hours passed slowly, and the night grew darker. By dawn, the boy's fever had broken, and his breathing had steadied. Lena's relief was palpable, and she thanked Olav profusely, tears streaming down her face. Olav, however, knew that his presence had not gone unnoticed. The villagers would soon hear of his intervention, and their fear and anger would likely grow. As he made his way back to his cabin, Olav felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had saved a life, despite the villagers' scorn. Yet he also knew that this act of kindness would further alienate him. The villagers' fear of the unknown, of his connection to the old ways, would only deepen. True to his fears, the villagers reacted with suspicion and anger when they learned of Olav's involvement. They whispered of dark magic and evil spirits, their distrust of him growing stronger. Hanili, despite her own misgivings, defended Olav as best she could, but her words fell on deaf ears. Olav retreated further into the forest, embracing his role as the enigmatic sorcerer of the woods. The villagers, while fearful, also grew to respect the boundary he represented. They left offerings at the edge of the forest, small tokens of their grudging acceptance and unspoken gratitude. In the end, Olav remained a solitary figure, bound to the ancient pines and the old gods. He continued his rituals, finding solace in the traditions of his ancestors. And though the villagers might never fully understand or accept him, they could not deny the power he wielded, nor the mysterious protection he seemed to offer from the dark, hidden depths of the ancient forest. Grandma Hanili was relentless in her efforts to persuade Olav. She was a stubborn woman, and when she set her mind on something, she pursued it with unwavering determination. Knowing Olav's solitary nature and his reluctance to involve himself with the villagers, she played on his sense of guilt and obligation. Olav, she said one evening, standing in the doorway of his cabin, her face stern yet pleading. You remember how I took care of you when you were sick, don't you? How I brought you soup and herbs, stayed by your side when no one else would. It's time you repaid that kindness. My niece needs your help. Olav turned away, his jaw set in defiance. I've told you, Hanili, I want nothing to do with the villagers. They fear me, they hate me. Why should I help them? Hanili stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. Because Olav, the demons that torment you are not just in your mind. They gnaw at your guts, feed on your bitterness and isolation. Helping my niece might bring you some peace. Don't you see? This isn't just about her, it's about you as well. Reluctantly, and more to quiet Hanili's persistent demands than out of genuine willingness, Olav agreed to visit her home. He knew that part of him was swayed by her reminders of the care she had shown him, and by a nagging sense of guilt that gnawed at his conscience. The walk to Hanili's house was short but felt longer in the heavy silence. The air was crisp, and the snow crunched beneath his boots. When they arrived, Hanili ushered him inside, where the warmth and coziness of her home enveloped him. The house was immaculately clean, a stark contrast to his own cluttered cabin. The smell of fried onions and fish wafted through the air, making his stomach growl despite himself. Inside, the light from the fire cast a golden glow on the wooden walls. The furniture was simple but well kept, and everywhere were signs of Hanili's meticulous care. Hand-woven blankets draped over chairs, and shelves were lined with jars of preserves and dried herbs. The atmosphere was one of homely comfort and care, a stark reminder of what Olav had distanced himself from. Hanili's niece, Lena, was seated at the kitchen table, her face a mask of worry. She stood as they entered, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Thank you for coming, Olav," she said softly, her eyes full of hope. Olav nodded curtly, his discomfort evident. "Hanili tells me your son is ill," he said, his voice gruff. Lena nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, he's been sick for weeks. The doctors can't do anything for him. Hanili said you might have other ways to help." Olav sighed deeply, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He had no love for the villagers, but he could not ignore the genuine distress in Lena's eyes. "I'll do what I can," he said finally. "But know this, my ways are not your ways. The old gods demand respect and offerings. Are you prepared for that?" Lena nodded eagerly. "I'll do anything to save my son. Please, just help him." That evening, Olav instructed Lena on what needed to be done. They gathered the necessary herbs and prepared the offerings. As the sun set, Olav led Lena to a secluded spot in the forest, where he set up an altar and began the ritual. The air was thick with anticipation, and the shadows seemed to dance around them as he chanted in the old tongue. Lena watched in awe and fear as Olav called upon the spirits of the forest, offering the venison and moonshine as tokens of their sincerity. The ritual was long and intense, and by the end, Lena was exhausted, but Olav felt a strange sense of calm. He had done what he could, now it was up to the spirits. The following days were tense, but slowly Lena's son began to recover. His fever broke, and his strength returned. Lena was overjoyed and thanked Olav profusely, though he brushed off her gratitude. He returned to his cabin, hoping that this act of aid might buy him some peace. However, the villagers' reaction was mixed. Some whispered of dark magic and were wary of the price that might be demanded in return. Others, however, began to see Olav in a slightly different light, recognizing the depth of his knowledge and the power he wielded. For Olav, the experience left him feeling both relieved and more isolated than ever. He knew that he had helped save a life, but it came at the cost of further alienating himself from the village. The old gods had been appeased, and for now the forest was at peace. Yet Olav could not shake the feeling that this fragile truce would not last forever. He continued his rituals, deeper in the forest, away from prying eyes. The villagers left him alone, respecting the boundary that his presence represented. And in the quiet of the ancient pines, Olav found a semblance of the peace that Hanili had spoken of, knowing that he was both a part of and apart from the world that lay beyond the edge of the forest. It was a cold, moonlit night when Olav heard a knock on his cabin door. Visitors were rare, especially strangers, so he approached with caution. Upon opening the door, he found a woman standing there, bundled tightly against the bitter cold. Her eyes were red from crying, and she carried an air of deep sorrow and desperation. "Good evening," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Maria. I've come from Sweden to seek your help. May I come in?" Olav stepped aside, allowing her into the warmth of his cabin. He gestured for her to sit by the fire, offering her a blanket and a mug of hot tea. Maria took a moment to compose herself before she began to speak, her hands clutching the mug as if it were a lifeline. Maria's story unfolded slowly, each word heavy with emotion. "My son, Alexei, was a romantic soul," she said, a faint smile touching her lips as she recalled his memory. He came from a Russian noble family that emigrated to Sweden during the revolution. He loved poetry and music, and he always had a dreamer's heart. Her smile faded as she continued. When the Winter War began, Alexei felt compelled to join the fight, believing in the cause. But he disappeared during the conflict, and I never saw him again. Olav listened intently, sensing that the heart of her tale was yet to come. Since his disappearance, Maria went on, he has started visiting me in my dreams. Every night I see him sitting by a fire, but he cannot get warm. He looks at me with such sadness, and I know his spirit is not at peace. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she took a shaky breath. I have come to believe that he was not buried with proper Christian rites. His spirit wanders, unable to find rest. I have heard of your connection to the old ways, your ability to communicate with the spirits. Please, Olav, help me bring peace to my son. I cannot bear to see him suffer like this any longer. Olav sat in silence for a moment, contemplating Maria's plea. He had long avoided involving himself in the affairs of the villagers and their kin, but Maria's desperation struck a chord within him. The image of a young man, cold and lost, haunted by the absence of proper burial rites, resonated with the deep respect he held for the dead and their journey to the afterlife. Very well, Olav said finally, his voice low and steady. I will help you, but know that this will not be easy. The spirits are not easily appeased, especially those who have been left wandering for so long. Maria nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and gratitude. Thank you, Olav. I will do whatever it takes to help my son find peace. The following days were a flurry of preparation. Olav instructed Maria on gathering specific herbs and items that would be necessary for the ritual. They ventured deep into the forest, collecting sacred plants and materials. Olav crafted an effigy of Alexei to serve as a focus for the ritual, and prepared a sacred space near an ancient, gnarled tree that stood as a silent guardian of the forest's secrets. On the night of the ritual, the air was thick with anticipation. The moon shone brightly, casting an ethereal glow on the snow-covered ground. Olav and Maria stood by the altar, the effigy of Alexei laid out before them. Olav lit a fire, its flames dancing and crackling, and began to chant in the old tongue, calling upon the spirits to guide Alexei's soul to peace. Maria watched in awe and trepidation as Olav conducted the ritual. His chants grew louder, more fervent, as he sprinkled the herbs into the fire, causing it to flare up with vibrant colors. The air seemed to vibrate with unseen energy, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. As the ritual reached its climax, Olav called out to Alexei's spirit, urging him to come forward and accept the offerings. The fire blazed higher, and for a moment Maria thought she saw the faint outline of her son in the flames, his face a mix of sorrow and relief. Alexei, Olav intoned, accept this offering and find your peace. Return to the embrace of the earth, and let your spirit be at rest. The fire gradually died down, and a profound silence settled over the forest. Maria felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned to Olav, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I feel that he is finally at peace. Olav nodded, though he felt the exhaustion of the ritual weighing heavily on him. He will no longer wander, Maria. His spirit has been guided to where it belongs. Maria embraced Olav, her heart full of gratitude and relief. She knew that she could now return to Sweden with a sense of closure, knowing that her son was finally at rest. As Maria spoke of her son, Alexei, Olav's mind wandered to the past. He had fought in the Winter War, and in the chaos of battle, he had taken many lives. The thought that one of those lives might have been Alexei's gnawed at him. Could it be possible that his bullet had ended the life of the young, romantic nobleman? Olav felt a pang of guilt, but quickly pushed it aside. War was war, and in the thick of it, one could not afford to dwell on individual lives lost. Each death was a consequence of survival, a necessary evil in the grand scheme of conflict. He hardened his heart, reminding himself that he had only done what was needed to stay alive. Maria seemed to sense his turmoil but showed no signs of blame. Olav, I do not hold you responsible for Alexei's death, she said softly. War takes from all of us, but his spirit is now lost, wandering in the Manula. Please help me bring him peace. Olov's face remained impassive as he stood up, leaning heavily on his rifle. "I cannot help you," he said, his voice firm but laced with a hint of regret. "The spirits of the dead are beyond my reach. Your son is lost to the Manula, and I have no power to change that." Maria's eyes filled with desperation as she stepped forward, her hands clasped in a pleading gesture. "Please, Olov. I have heard of your abilities, your connection to the old gods. There must be something you can do. I beg you." Olov shook his head, turning away from her. "Even if I could, it is not my place to interfere. The dead belong to their own world, and the living must accept their fate. I am sorry." As he began to walk away, using his rifle as a makeshift cane, Maria's voice broke with despair. "I can pay you, Olov. Whatever you ask, it's yours. Just please help my son." Olov paused, his back still turned to her. "I do not need your money," he said quietly. "My wealth is the forest, the mountains, and the freedom they offer. No amount of gold can change that." Maria fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Olov. I am a mother who has lost her son. I cannot rest knowing he is out there, cold and alone. If you have any compassion, any decency, I beg you to reconsider." The raw pain in her voice pierced Olov's heart. He had lived a life of solitude, driven by the need to distance himself from the hatred and fear of the villagers. Yet here was a woman, not blaming him but pleading for his help, not for herself but for her lost son. Olov stood still for a long moment, the weight of Maria's plea heavy on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. Slowly he turned back to face her, his expression softened by a resolve born of empathy. "Very well," he said, his voice resigned but determined. "I will help you, Maria. Not because of the money, but because no soul should wander lost and alone. Gather your things and meet me at dawn by the ancient pine. We will do what we can to bring Alexei's spirit to peace." Maria's tear-streaked face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Olov. Thank you." The next morning, Maria met Olov at the appointed spot, carrying the items he had instructed her to gather. The ancient pine loomed over them, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Olov set up the altar and began the ritual, his chants echoing through the forest. He called upon the old gods, asking them to guide Alexei's spirit to the place of rest. Maria watched with bated breath, clutching a small locket that had belonged to her son. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. As the ritual reached its climax, Olov felt a shift in the air. The fire before them flared up, casting eerie shadows. A faint figure appeared within the flames, a young man with a sad but peaceful expression. It was Alexei. Olov spoke softly to the spirit, guiding him towards the light of the old gods. Slowly the figure began to fade, and as it did, the fire died down to embers. The forest exhaled, and a profound silence settled over them. Maria fell to her knees, sobbing with relief and gratitude. "He's at peace," she whispered. "Thank you, Olov. Thank you for giving my son the rest he deserved." Olov nodded, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment and peace himself. "Go home, Maria. Remember your son with love, not sorrow. His spirit is where it belongs now." As Maria departed, Olov stood alone by the ancient pine, the weight of his actions settling over him. He had bridged the gap between the living and the dead, bringing solace to a grieving mother and peace to a wandering soul. In the end, Olov realized that even in his isolation, he could still touch the lives of others, and as he walked back to his cabin, he felt a small, but significant, change within himself, a flicker of warmth in the cold expanse of his solitary existence. Maria, sensing that her initial pleas were not enough to sway Olov, gathered her courage for a final, desperate attempt. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Olov," she began, "I know about your sister in Helsinki. I know that the communists took her farm and left her with nothing. It's an injustice that should be righted." Olov's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise and anger crossing his face. "How do you know about my sister?" he demanded. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to him. "This is a cadastral extract of your sister's farm," she said, "and I have connections in the parliament. I can help you get her land back." Olov unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the document. The details were accurate, and the weight of her offer began to sink in. Maria then took out her passport and placed it on the table in front of him. "This is my passport," she said. "Take it as a sign of my sincerity. I am putting my identity, my very freedom, in your hands. All I ask in return is that you help my son find peace." Olav stared at the passport, then back at Maria. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. He knew she was serious, and the thought of finally being able to help his sister was a powerful motivator. However, he couldn't entirely shake his distrust. "You are serious," he said slowly, still holding the passport. "But understand this, Maria, if you are lying to me, if this is some trick, there will be consequences. The spirits I deal with are not kind to those who deceive." Maria nodded, her expression resolute. "I understand, Olav. I swear on my son's memory that I am telling the truth. Please just help him." Olav took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "Very well," he said finally. "I will help you. I will ask the dead about your son, and we will see if his spirit can be guided to peace." Olav spent the next day preparing for the ritual. He instructed Maria to gather specific items: herbs, a piece of Alexei's clothing, and a lock of his hair if she had one. Maria complied, bringing everything he asked for with meticulous care. They set out for the ancient pine once more, the air heavy with anticipation and a sense of foreboding. Olav prepared the altar, arranging the items with precision and muttering incantations under his breath. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Olav began the ritual. His chants grew louder, resonating through the forest. The fire roared to life, casting eerie shadows around them. Olav called out to the spirits, his voice commanding and filled with authority. Maria watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She held the lock of Alexei's hair tightly, praying silently for his spirit to find peace. The fire blazed higher, and once again, the faint figure of Alexei appeared within the flames. "Alexei," Olav intoned, his voice steady. "Your mother has come to seek your peace. Accept these offerings and find your way to rest." The spirit of Alexei seemed to nod, his expression softening. The fire flared one last time before dying down to embers. The air around them grew still, and Maria felt a profound sense of calm. Maria fell to her knees, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you, Olav. I feel that Alexei is finally at peace." Olav nodded, though his expression remained serious. "I have done what I can. Now, you must uphold your end of the bargain. Help my sister, as you promised." Maria stood, her resolve firm. "I will, Olav. I swear it. Your sister will get her farm back." As Olav disappeared into the darkness, Maria remained by the fire, her heart heavy with worry and determination. The flames flickered, casting long shadows around her. She stared into the fire, her mind swirling with thoughts of her son. Suddenly, the fire's glow intensified, and a vision appeared within the flames. Maria gasped as she saw her son, Alexei, standing there in his tattered uniform, riddled with bullet holes. His face was pale, and his body shivered violently from the cold. His eyes, filled with pain and longing, locked onto hers. "Mother," he whispered, his voice a haunting echo. "Please, take me away from this place. I am so cold." Maria's heart ached with a sorrow she had never known. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out towards the vision, but her hand passed through the flames. "Alexei, my dear boy," she cried. "I will do everything I can to help you. I promise." The vision flickered and began to fade, leaving Maria alone with her grief and a renewed resolve. She knew she had to convince Olav to help her, no matter what it took. That night, Maria was plagued by horrific nightmares. She saw Alexei wandering through a desolate wasteland, his uniform torn and bloodied, his eyes hollow and filled with despair. Each time she reached out to him, he slipped further away, his cries for help echoing in her mind. She woke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. The visions of her son's suffering drove her to the brink of desperation. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had given Olav a day and a half to seek the answers from the dead, but now she felt that time was slipping away too quickly. Maria decided to take matters into her own hands. She sought out a local reindeer herder, a man known for his knowledge of the land and his ability to track even the most elusive prey. She explained her plight, her voice trembling with urgency and fear. "I need to find Olav," she said. "I have to make sure he helps my son. Can you take me to him?" The herder, seeing the desperation in her eyes, agreed. "I will take you," he said, "but the forest is vast, and finding him will not be easy." As Maria and the herder set out into the dense forest, Olav was already deep in his preparations. He had returned to his cabin to gather the necessary tools and ingredients for the ritual. The ancient texts, herbs, and ceremonial items were laid out before him, and he worked meticulously to ensure everything was in place. Olav knew the risks of communicating with the dead, especially a spirit as restless as Alexi's. He chanted incantations and made offerings to the old gods, seeking their guidance and protection. The air in his cabin grew thick with the scent of burning herbs and the sound of whispered prayers. As Olav prepared, Maria and the herder pressed on through the forest. The journey was arduous, the terrain unforgiving, but Maria's determination never wavered. Her nightmares and the vision of Alexei drove her forward, giving her strength and resolve. After hours of searching, they finally found Olav near a secluded grove, deep in his ritual preparations. Maria stumbled into the clearing, breathless and exhausted, but with a fierce determination in her eyes. "Olav," she called out, her voice breaking the silence. "I cannot wait any longer. My son needs your help now." Olav looked up, startled by their sudden appearance. He saw the desperation etched on Maria's face and the resolve in her eyes. He knew there was no turning back now. "Very well," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I will do what I can to help your son. But remember, this is dangerous, and there are no guarantees." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Thank you, Olav. Whatever the risk, I will take it. Just please help Alexei find peace." With Maria and the herder watching, Olav completed his preparations and began the ritual. The air grew heavy with a palpable energy, and the fire in the center of the grove blazed with an otherworldly light. Olav's chants grew louder, calling upon the spirits to guide Alexei to the afterlife. As the ritual reached its peak, the flames roared higher, and once again, the figure of Alexei appeared within them. He looked at Maria, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "Mother," he whispered, "I am ready to rest." Olav, his voice steady and commanding, spoke to the spirit. "Alexei, it is time to find peace. Accept this offering and move on from this world." The spirit of Alexei seemed to nod, his form becoming less distinct as the fire began to die down. The oppressive energy in the air lifted, and a profound silence settled over the grove. Maria collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Olav," she whispered. "Thank you for giving my son peace." Olav nodded, though he felt the exhaustion of the ritual weighing heavily on him. "It is done," he said simply. "Go now and remember your son with love." As Maria and the herder made their way back through the forest, Olav remained in the grove, contemplating the events that had transpired. He had helped a lost soul find peace and brought comfort to a grieving mother. In the end, the forest was once again his home, a place of solitude and reflection. But now, Olav carried with him the knowledge that even in his isolation, he could still make a difference. And as the wind whispered through the trees, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had honored both the living and the dead. The local tracker, Sam, was well known for his ability to navigate the dense and treacherous forests of Lapland. When Maria approached him for help in finding Olav, he agreed, intrigued by her story and moved by her desperation. Sam led Maria through the forest with a practiced eye, following the faint signs that marked Olav's passage. He pointed out broken branches, disturbed underbrush, and the faint imprints of footprints in the snow. His skills were invaluable, and Maria was grateful for his expertise. However, as they ventured deeper into the forest, the path became more challenging. The snow grew thicker, and the terrain more rugged. Sam, sensing the increasing difficulty, turned to Maria with a grave expression. "This is where I must leave you," he said. "The path ahead is too dangerous for the sledge. You will have to continue on foot." Maria looked ahead, the path daunting and filled with obstacles. Her feet were already sore from the journey, and the thought of continuing on foot was daunting. But she knew she couldn't give up now. Her son's tormented spirit depended on her perseverance. "Thank you, Sam," Maria said, her voice filled with resolve. "I will continue alone." Sam nodded, his respect for her evident. "Good luck, Maria. Follow the tracks carefully, and you will find him." With renewed determination, Maria pressed on, each step a testament to her unwavering resolve. The snow crunched under her boots, and the cold bit at her skin, but she pushed through, driven by the vision of her son's suffering. The forest was silent save for her labored breathing and the occasional rustle of wildlife. Hours passed, and Maria's progress was slow. Her feet throbbed with pain, and each step became a test of endurance. She stumbled several times, catching herself on the rough bark of trees. The cold seeped through her clothes, chilling her to the bone. But she refused to stop. Her thoughts were consumed by Alexei, his anguished face haunting her every step. She whispered prayers under her breath, calling upon whatever forces might hear her to guide her to Olive. Just as her strength began to wane, Maria heard a sound in the distance, the heavy, deliberate steps of a man moving through the forest. Her heart leapt with hope. She quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her feet and the biting cold. As she drew closer, the figure of Olive came into view. He moved with purpose, his back bent slightly under the weight of his pack, his rifle slung over one shoulder. Maria's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of relief and urgency flooding her senses. "Olive," she called out, her voice strained but determined. Olive stopped and turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. "Maria," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and resignation. "You should not have followed me." Maria stumbled forward, her exhaustion evident. "I had no choice," she said, her voice trembling. "My son needs you, Olive. I cannot do this without your help." Olive studied her for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Very well," he said, his voice softening. "You have shown great determination. Let us see what the spirits have to say." Maria nodded, tears of gratitude and relief welling up in her eyes. She had found Olive, and with his help, she would finally be able to bring peace to her beloved son. Olive led Maria to a secluded clearing dominated by a large, ancient stone. The air was thick with anticipation as he began gathering wood, arranging the logs meticulously in a circle around the stone. His movements were deliberate and practiced, each gesture carrying the weight of tradition and power. From his pack, Olive produced a small white hare, its eyes wide with fear. Maria watched, her heart pounding as Olive murmured an incantation, his voice low and resonant. He swiftly sacrificed the hare, allowing its blood to spill onto the cold, gray stone. The crimson liquid ran down the rock, seeping into its cracks and crevices. Olive then set the wood ablaze, the fire quickly growing into a roaring inferno. He chanted in a language Maria could not understand, calling upon the dark forces he revered. The flames danced wildly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. Maria watched in a mixture of awe and fear as the fire consumed the hare's body, transforming it into glowing embers. Olive continued his chants, his voice rising and falling rhythmically, commanding the attention of the spirits. The air grew colder, and Maria could feel a palpable shift in the atmosphere, as if unseen eyes were watching them. The hare's body, now reduced to charcoal, lay still in the fire. Olive's chanting reached a crescendo, and he reached into the flames, retrieving the smoldering remains. With careful precision, he smeared the ashes across his boots and face, the dark streak standing out starkly against his weathered skin. Completing his preparations, Olive began to walk in circles around the stone, his movements purposeful and measured. He circled the stone 3 times, each step seeming to echo with ancient power. Maria watched, her breath held, as Olive's form grew fainter with each pass. On the final circuit, Olive's figure wavered like a mirage, and then, in an instant, he vanished completely. The fire continued to crackle. The stone remained blood-stained, but Olive was gone. Panic surged through Maria as she saw Olive disappear before her eyes. She rushed forward, her fear of losing him propelling her into action. "Olive," she cried, her voice breaking the eerie silence of the clearing. She reached the stone, her hands trembling as she touched its cold surface. There was no sign of Olive, only the remnants of the ritual and the lingering scent of burning wood. Desperation clawed at her heart as she realized how close she was to losing any chance of saving her son. Determined not to give up, Maria knelt beside the stone, her mind racing. She tried to recall every detail of the ritual, hoping for some clue that might help her follow Olive. Her fingers traced the grooves in the stone, still warm from the blood and fire. Suddenly, a thought struck her. She gathered some of the ashes from the fire, smearing them across her own face and boots, mimicking Olive's actions. With a deep breath, she stood and began to circle the stone, her heart pounding with fear and hope. As she completed the third circle, Maria felt a strange sensation, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting around her. The forest seemed to blur and twist, and for a moment she felt disoriented. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the sensation passed, and she found herself standing in a place that was both familiar and strange. The clearing was the same, yet different, the air heavy with an otherworldly presence. In the distance, she saw a figure Olive, waiting for her. She ran towards him, her relief palpable. Olive, she gasped, her voice filled with a mix of fear and determination. I won't let you leave me behind. We must save my son. Olive looked at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. You have courage, Maria. The spirits will see this. Let us continue. Together they ventured deeper into the mystical realm, the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring as they sought to bring peace to Alexi's restless spirit. Determined to follow in Olive's footsteps, Maria replicated his ritual with fervor and desperation. She found a thorn branch and pricked her finger, letting the blood drip onto the stone. With trembling hands, she smeared the crimson liquid across her face and clothes, mirroring Olive's actions. With each step, Maria felt a surge of power and connection to the ancient forces that Olive had invoked. She completed 3 circles around the stone, her movements guided by instinct and the echoes of Olive's chants. As Maria finished the ritual, a sense of disorientation washed over her. The world around her seemed to warp and shift, twisting into unfamiliar shapes and colors. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself against the dizzying sensation. When she opened them again, Maria found herself in a place unlike any she had ever seen. She stood at the edge of a vast chasm, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Above her, a rickety rope bridge spanned the gap, swaying perilously in the breeze. Across the chasm, Maria saw Olive, walking on the water's surface as if it were solid ground. His form shimmered in the dim light, his footsteps leaving ripples in the water behind him. Maria's heart raced as she watched Olive's ghostly figure move further away from her. She knew she had to follow him, to learn the secrets he held, and to find her son's restless spirit. Gathering her courage, Maria stepped onto the bridge, each creaking plank threatening to give way beneath her weight. The chasm yawned below her, its depths hidden in shadow. With each step, Maria felt the pull of the unknown growing stronger. She focused on Olive's figure ahead of her, determined to reach him no matter the cost. As Maria ventured further into the eerie landscape, she felt the presence of unseen forces pressing in on her from all sides. Strange whispers echoed in her ears, and the air grew thick with an oppressive weight. But still, she pressed on, driven by her love for her son and her determination to bring him peace. Ahead, Olive's figure beckoned to her, a solitary beacon of hope in the darkness. With each step, Maria drew closer to the truth, to the answers she sought, and to the final confrontation that awaited her. On the opposite shore, Olive was greeted by a terrifying guardian, a towering, bald figure with iron teeth and 3 massive hounds at his side. This guardian, known as Talon Miss, welcomed the shaman with a sinister grin, his eyes gleaming with malice. Despite his fearsome appearance, Talon Mississippi extended a twisted form of hospitality, inviting Olive to partake in a drink. After his encounter with Talon Miss, Olive approached the looming black gates with caution. The heavy gates seemed to radiate an ominous energy, but Olive pressed on undeterred. He reached out and placed his hand upon the gates, leaving behind a faint blue imprint of his palm. In response, the gates groaned and creaked, slowly swinging open to grant him passage. As the gates opened, Olav felt a chill run down his spine, a sensation of foreboding washing over him. Yet, he knew he had no choice but to continue his journey into the unknown depths beyond. With resolve in his heart, Olav stepped through the gates, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead in his quest to bring peace to the restless spirits. As Olav passed through the gates, he found himself in the desolate realm of the dead, where eternal frost gripped the land and the forests teemed with fearless creatures. Despite the eerie surroundings, Olav felt a strange sense of calm in this realm, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the living world, with its wars and bustling cities. Walking along a winding path, Olav stumbled upon a group of dead Finnish and Russian soldiers gathered around a flickering campfire. Their ghostly forms seemed frozen in time, their eyes hollow and empty, yet still filled with longing. Among them stood a young soldier named Vanka, his voice soft and pleading as he implored Olav to write a letter to his parents in Voronezh, informing them of his death. But Olav, unmoved by the soldier's request, refused, citing his lack of knowledge in Russian and his belief that Vanka was responsible for his own demise. Olav's refusal sparked a tense exchange between him and the soldier, with Vanka's ghost pleading for compassion and understanding. But Olav remained steadfast in his decision, his voice tinged with bitterness as he chastised Vanka for his actions in life. Despite the soldier's pleas, Olav remained unmoved, his resolve unshaken by the ghostly specter before him. In the land of the dead, where the past held sway over all who dwelled there, Olav stood firm in his conviction, unwilling to bend to the demands of the departed. Olav stood firm in his decision, refusing to grant Vanka's request. Memories of Vanka's beliefs as a communist soldier flooded Olav's mind, reminding him of the soldier's disbelief in God and the afterlife. With a bitter resolve, Olav dismissed Vanka's plea, unmoved by the soldier's threats to haunt him in his dreams and show him the horrors of his death. Despite the unsettling encounter, Olav pressed forward along the desolate path of the dead, illuminated by the flickering light of countless campfires around which ghostly soldiers gathered. He followed a familiar route, known to him from his previous journeys through this realm, occasionally veering off the path and navigating through deep drifts of snow. The air was thick with an oppressive silence broken only by the whispers of the restless dead. Olav felt their eyes upon him as he passed, their silent pleas for release echoing in his ears. Yet he remained resolute, his mind focused on his ultimate goal of bringing peace to the spirits trapped in this icy realm. As Olav journeyed deeper into the land of the dead, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous, with jagged rocks and icy crevasses posing constant hazards. Yet he moved with a steady determination, his steps guided by an instinct honed through years of traversing this haunted landscape. Though shadows danced and flickered around him, Olav's resolve remained unshaken. He knew the dangers that lurked in the darkness, the unseen threats that whispered in the icy winds. But he also knew that he carried within him the power to confront them, to challenge the terrors of the land of the dead and emerge victorious. With each step, Olav drew closer to his destination, his heart filled with a quiet determination to fulfill his sacred duty and bring peace to the tormented souls that awaited him beyond the veil of death. In the eerie silence of the land of the dead, Olav's keen ears caught the piercing cry of a living soul. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards the sound, guided by the desperate voice echoing through the icy wasteland. As he drew closer, the cry grew louder, driving him onward through the frigid darkness. Rounding a bend in the ghostly landscape, Olav stumbled upon a harrowing scene. Maria, surrounded by spectral Red Army soldiers whose icy touch threatened to freeze her to the core. Their ghostly forms loomed ominously, their eyes devoid of warmth as they closed in on their helpless victim. With a commanding voice, Olav ordered the dead soldiers to stand down, asserting his authority over them with an air of unwavering confidence. He declared that Maria belonged to him, invoking a power that sent shivers down the spines of the spectral soldiers. Faced with the sheer force of the shaman's will, they reluctantly released their grip on Maria, allowing Olav to rescue her from their icy clutches. Leading Maria away from the chilling scene, Olav gently brushed off the frost that clung to her, his demeanor both protective and authoritative. As they moved to a safer distance from the ghostly soldiers, Olav took a moment to explain the dangers of venturing too close to the fires of the dead, cautioning Maria against any further recklessness. In the aftermath of the ordeal, Maria expressed her gratitude to Olive for saving her from certain doom, her voice trembling with relief and remorse. She apologized profusely for her lapse in judgment, acknowledging the gravity of her mistake. Olive accepted her apology with a nod, his eyes reflecting both understanding and a lingering sense of vigilance in the face of the ever-present dangers of the land of the dead. As Maria knelt before Olive, her voice quivering with emotion, she poured out her apologies for her impulsive decision to follow him into the perilous realm of the dead. She expressed her deep-seated fear that Olive would not return, her tears mingling with the frosty air as she trembled with uncertainty. In the midst of Maria's tearful apology, Olive and Maria were suddenly confronted by a terrifying sight: a dark-skinned giant of immense strength and ferocity. Towering over the spectral soldiers, the giant mercilessly tore them apart with his bare hands, their ethereal forms crumbling before his onslaught. To Olive and Maria's horror, the dead soldiers miraculously regenerated after each brutal attack, their shattered forms piecing themselves back together with a chilling semblance of amusement. The giant seemed to revel in the grotesque spectacle, his laughter echoing through the icy expanse as he repeated his merciless slaughter again and again. As the gruesome cycle of death and rebirth unfolded before them, Olive and Maria watched in stunned silence, their hearts heavy with dread at the realization of the twisted fate that awaited the souls trapped in this desolate realm. The giant's savage laughter filled the air, a grim reminder of the unyielding grip of death that held sway over the land of the dead. As the giant continued his relentless assault on the hapless soldiers, Olive and Maria exchanged a silent glance, their thoughts consumed by the ominous portent of the dark giant's presence. With a sinking feeling in their hearts, they knew that their journey through the land of the dead had only just begun, and that darker and more perilous trials lay ahead in their quest for redemption and salvation. As Olive and Maria navigated the treacherous landscape of the land of the dead, they were unexpectedly met by a man who revealed himself to be Paika, the son of the ruler of Manula. Paika's face lit up with joy at the sight of Olive, expressing his delight at their reunion. However, his attention soon turned to Maria, his keen senses detecting a familiar scent emanating from her. With a disturbing eagerness, Paika expressed a desire to take a bite from Maria's face, but Olive swiftly intervened, reminding him of the rules that governed their interactions in this realm. Despite the unsettling encounter, Olive politely requested Paika's assistance in guiding them to the halls of Kalme. Paika readily agreed, offering to lead them on the path to their destination. With a confident stride, Paika instructed Olive and Maria to follow a straight path until they reached a forked pine tree, where they would then veer onto a narrow trail leading to a black reflection. It was within this dark reflection that they would find the doorway to their destination. As Olive and Maria prepared to follow Paika's guidance, a sense of apprehension weighed heavily upon them. They knew that the path ahead would be fraught with dangers and trials, yet they also understood that it was their only chance at achieving their goal. With a silent nod of gratitude to Paika, they steeled themselves for the challenges that lay ahead, their determination unwavering as they embarked on the next leg of their harrowing journey through the land of the dead. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Paika quickly lost interest in Olive and Maria, deeming them dull and uninteresting company. With a derisive snort, he announced his intention to return to his gruesome pastimes with the dead soldiers, his laughter echoing wildly through the desolate landscape. The cacophonous sound startled a flock of crows nearby, sending them scattering into the darkened sky in a frenzy of flapping wings and shrill caws. As Paika's laughter faded into the distance, Olive turned to Maria, offering her an explanation for the dead's uncanny knowledge and recognition of him. He revealed that Manula was a repository for all knowledge, and it was through this repository that the dead gained their understanding of the world. However, Olive explained, knowledge traveled slowly from afar, and thus none of the spirits in Manula possessed any knowledge of Maria's existence or significance. With a solemn tone, Olive conveyed to Maria the enigmatic nature of Manula, a realm shrouded in mystery and secrets. He spoke of the ancient wisdom that dwelled within its halls, knowledge that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Yet, even as he spoke, Olive could not help but feel a pang of unease. knowing that the true depths of Manula's secrets remained hidden, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek them out. As Olive and Maria pondered the mysteries of Manula, they realized that their journey was far from over. Ahead of them lay a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, its twists and turns obscured by the shadows of the unknown. But despite the looming challenges that lay ahead, they remained undeterred, their resolve unshakable as they pressed onward into the heart of darkness, guided by the faint glimmer of hope that flickered within their souls. Amidst the throngs of the dead, Maria remained unrecognized, her presence lost in the vast expanse of the afterlife. Olive explained that because she lived so far away, her existence faded from memory, her name whispered by none. In contrast, Olive's own reputation spread like wildfire through the ether, his deeds and presence sparking fear and reverence in the hearts of many. Following Pika's guidance, Maria and Olive eventually arrived at their destination, a massive black boulder adorned with an iron door, its surface carved with intricate runes. As they stood before the imposing entrance, Olive cautioned Maria to approach calmly with the utmost respect and deference. The air around them seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, setting their nerves on edge as they prepared to cross the threshold into the unknown. With a deep breath, Olive reached out and grasped the cold iron handle of the door, its surface cool beneath his touch. As the heavy door creaked open, revealing a yawning abyss of darkness beyond, Olive and Maria exchanged a meaningful glance, their hearts pounding with anticipation and trepidation. With resolve in their hearts and determination in their eyes, they stepped forward into the inky blackness, ready to confront whatever awaited them within the mysterious halls of Calme. Olive rapped sharply on the door, the sound echoing ominously through the dimly lit corridor. After a tense moment, the door creaked open, revealing the hunched figure of Calme, her expression stern and unwelcoming. Undeterred, Olive presented her with gifts: forged nails and carpenter's glue, tokens of respect and goodwill. Reluctantly, Calme relented, begrudgingly inviting them into her domain. Once inside, Calme wasted no time in dispelling any hope Maria held of finding her son among the wandering spirits. With a tone as cold as the grave, she explained that the dead were fated to wander aimlessly for eternity, their memories scattered like dust upon the wind. Yet, Calme offered a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness, revealing that she alone possessed the knowledge that could lead Maria to her son. With a mixture of desperation and determination, Maria implored Calme to share her secrets, her heart pounding with the weight of uncertainty and anticipation. Calme loomed tall and gaunt, draped in tattered black rags that billowed around her like funeral shrouds. Her face, black as midnight, was dominated by a long, slender nose that seemed to stretch toward the heavens. With her towering stature and ethereal presence, she resembled a black poplar tree, her form both majestic and foreboding. In her quest to aid Maria in finding her son, Calme began to unearth the buried dead, casting aside the earth-caked lids of their coffins with a swift and practiced hand. As the graves yielded their grisly occupants, Maria was confronted with a ghastly array of corpses: peasants and soldiers, their once human forms now twisted and decayed. Their bodies, ravaged by time and decay, bore witness to the relentless march of death, their gaping wounds and protruding entrails serving as a haunting reminder of their mortal demise. Yet, despite their grotesque appearance, Calme urged Maria to search among them, hopeful that one of the lifeless husks might hold the key to her son's whereabouts. Maria, gripped by horror, found herself unable to recognize her son among the macabre gathering of corpses unearthed by Calme's relentless search. With a sinking heart, she realized that the faces before her were but grotesque parodies of the loved ones she once knew. Calme, sensing Maria's despair, offered a grim reassurance: in the realm of dreams, the dead could assume any guise, making it impossible to trust the visage before her. Despite Calme's best efforts and several fruitless attempts, Maria's son remained elusive, his whereabouts shrouded in mystery amidst the sea of lifeless bodies. With each empty grave and every failed excavation, Maria's hope dwindled, replaced by a gnawing sense of despair. Calme, her own frustration evident, lamented the inability to provide the closure Maria sought, acknowledging the futility of their efforts despite Olive's generous offerings. As the realization of their failure settled like a pall over the solemn gathering, Call me bid Maria and Olav a somber farewell, her voice heavy with regret. With a final sorrowful glance at the desolate landscape before them, Maria and Olav turned away from the gravesite, their hearts heavy with grief and uncertainty. With each step they took away from the realm of the dead, they carried with them the weight of unanswered questions and unfulfilled longing, their journey fraught with the haunting specter of what might have been. Realizing her inability to aid them further, Kalmi guides Maria and Olav to another part of Manula. With a solemn warning to be prepared for anything, she opens the lid of a coffin-like vessel, casting them into the abyss of darkness, from which they awaken in a gorge surrounded by flickering torches. In the bright realm of Manula dwell the souls of ancestors, including venerable elders and women who passed long before the baptism of the first Finns. Among them resides Wainamoinen, the hero of ancient myths. This land, abundant with fish, game, and forest creatures, resembles a northern paradise, contrasting sharply with the bleak lands Maria witnessed earlier. Silently traversing the picturesque landscapes of Manula, Maria and Olav soak in the ethereal beauty around them. Olav elucidates that in the bright realm spirits always find their way, and they can even depart the realm of the dead to visit the living. Unlike the dark lands, where the dead wander aimlessly, here, everything is organized differently. Olav, familiar with the path, instructs Maria to follow him and remain silent, as she doesn't grasp the workings of this world. Filled with fear and desperation, Maria obediently follows him, hoping to find her son. Their journey leads them to a spacious underground grotto, warm and smelling of mushrooms. In the grotto, they encounter a stout man seated on a throne, who effortlessly transforms roots and sticks into torches with a snap of his fingers, filling the grotto with orange light. Lord Tony, the black-clad man in dirty furs, approaches Maria and Olav. Olav respectfully implores Tony to release the soul of Maria's son, noting Maria's Christian faith. He expresses readiness to undertake a task for Tony in exchange for the liberation of her son's soul. Tony agrees to exchange with Maria. He promises to release her son in exchange for another sacrifice. He emphasizes that in Menol, the rules are the same for everyone, and any exchange must be equivalent. Maria agrees to Tony's terms without hesitation, willing to accept any conditions as long as her son is freed. She is ready to give up anything to relieve her son from torment. Tony proposes to exchange Maria for another victim, prompting her to collapse to her knees, tears streaming down her face in a mixture of outrage and despair. Even Olav, though seething with indignation at the proposition, restrains himself from lashing out. With Olav's guidance, Tony locates and retrieves Oleshka, Maria's long-lost son, from the earth. The emotional reunion between mother and son is swiftly interrupted by Tony's callousness, extinguishing the fleeting joy of their reunion. Tony accuses Maria of deceit and cruelly punishes her by turning Oleshka into a new victim. Olav, too, condemns Maria for her deception, instilling fear and horror in her with his actions. Realizing that her son is left with Tony and Olav, Maria resolves not to follow them. She grapples with the heavy reality of her situation and resigns herself to hope for a future reunion. Maria remains alone amidst the darkness and cold, experiencing sorrow and loss. She becomes accustomed to the idea that her son no longer belongs to her and that she can no longer protect him. Maria is deceived and left in the forest, not understanding why she has ended up in such a situation. Her astonishment and bewilderment indicate that she did not know what to expect from Tony and Olav. Han, Maria's dog, follows her into the woods, expressing loyalty and devotion to his owner. However, Maria realizes that she is guilty of leading the dog into a dangerous situation. Resting, present in the scene, experiences a sense of unease and crosses himself, expressing his anxious forebodings. His gestures and words underscore the ominous mood of the scene and foreshadow impending misfortune. In the remote expanses of the Ural Mountains, nestled within the dense and seemingly impenetrable taiga, lies a small, unassuming village. Life in this secluded settlement proceeds at a tranquil pace, dictated by the rhythm of nature and the traditions passed down through generations. However, beneath the surface of this serene existence, an eerie and unsettling phenomenon haunts the villagers every autumn. As the crisp air of early fall settles over the forest, the local villagers embark on their annual ritual of mushroom foraging. The taiga, with its bountiful array of fungi, offers a generous harvest, promising sustenance and a connection to the earth that sustains them. Yet this yearly tradition is marred by a chilling reality every year. Without fail, one or more villagers vanish without a trace while gathering mushrooms in the forest. The disappearances have become an ominous tradition of their own, casting a long, dark shadow over the community. Families bid farewell to their loved ones with heavy hearts, knowing that some may never return. The villagers have recounted these stories for generations, each year adding a new layer of mystery and fear to the folklore that envelops the taiga. Those who venture into the forest describe an almost palpable sense of foreboding. The trees, towering and ancient, seem to whisper secrets to one another, their leaves rustling with an eerie cadence. Paths that appear well-trodden in the daylight twist and turn unexpectedly, leading even the most seasoned foragers astray. Compasses spin wildly, and GPS devices malfunction, leaving people disoriented and vulnerable to the vastness of the taiga. Survivors, the fortunate few who find their way back, tell tales that defy rational explanation. Some speak of strange figures glimpsed at the edge of their vision, vanishing as quickly as they appear. Others describe an overpowering sense of being watched, as if unseen eyes are tracking their every move. The most chilling accounts involve disembodied whispers that seem to emanate from the very heart of the forest, luring the unwary deeper into its clutches. The villagers have tried to unravel the mystery, but to no avail. Search parties scouring the forest find no trace of the missing, no footprints, no belongings, no clues. It's as if the forest itself swallows them whole, leaving nothing behind. Elders speak of ancient curses and vengeful spirits, while others suggest more grounded explanations: hidden sinkholes, treacherous terrain, or wild animals. Yet none of these theories can fully account for the pervasive sense of malevolence that seems to grip the forest each autumn. In recent years, some have dared to abandon the age-old tradition of mushroom foraging, choosing instead to buy their provisions from safer, albeit less bountiful, sources. However, the forest's pull is strong, and many still venture into the taiga, driven by necessity, tradition, or perhaps an unspoken compulsion that they cannot resist. As another autumn approaches, the villagers brace themselves for what has become an annual ordeal. They hold their loved ones a little tighter, whispering prayers and offering sacrifices to whatever forces govern the forest's dark heart. And once again, they will watch the tree line with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing that the taiga's mysteries remain unsolved, its secrets forever lurking just beyond the edge of human understanding. In the remote village nestled deep within the Ural Mountains, the annual disappearances of mushroom foragers had become a haunting legend, instilling fear and dread among the inhabitants. Each autumn, as the villagers ventured into the dense taiga to gather mushrooms, the forest would claim its mysterious toll, swallowing people without a trace. Desperate to put an end to the inexplicable losses, the village elders devised a plan that seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. A boundary was established around the village, marked by a vivid red ribbon strung along the trees at the forest's edge. This boundary was decreed as the line of safety. No one was to venture beyond it. The crimson ribbon, stark against the verdant foliage, was a tangible reminder of the invisible threat that lurked in the depths of the taiga. It was a simple yet profound solution, one that the villagers hoped would protect them from the forest's malevolent grip. In the days that followed the boundary's establishment, a palpable change settled over the village. The fear that had once gripped the hearts of the villagers began to wane. The crimson line became a symbol of hope and security, a barrier that seemingly held back the forest's dark influence. Families went about their daily lives with a newfound sense of peace, believing that the threat had been contained. As the weeks turned into months, the red ribbon remained intact, its vibrant color unwavering against the changing seasons. For the first time in years, an entire autumn passed without a single disappearance. The villagers, while still wary of the forest, began to breathe easier. They gathered mushrooms within the safe confines of the boundary, grateful for the bounty that the forest provided without the accompanying terror. However, the forest was not so easily tamed. On a crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a young girl named Anya, curious and adventurous, found herself drawn to the edge of the boundary. The ribbon fluttered gently in the breeze, and beyond it, the forest seemed to whisper her name. Ignoring the warnings of her elders and the stories of those who had vanished, Anya stepped beyond the crimson line. As soon as she crossed the boundary, an oppressive silence enveloped her. The forest, so familiar from within the safety of the village, now felt alien and hostile. Anya pressed on, her curiosity overpowering her fear. She moved deeper into the woods, the red ribbon now a distant memory. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, its shadows deepening into an inky blackness. Back in the village, Anya's absence was soon noticed. Panic spread quickly as the villagers realized she had crossed the forbidden line. A search party was hastily assembled, and they followed her tracks to the boundary, but no further. The crimson ribbon, their symbol of safety, now marked the line they dared not cross. They called her name into the darkness, their voices swallowed by the forest's eerie silence. Anya was never seen again. The villagers, stricken with grief and guilt, reinforced the boundary, adding layers of warning signs and lanterns to mark the edge of safety. The disappearances, it seemed, had not been truly halted, only momentarily stilled. The crimson line held back the forest's sinister reach, but it could not erase the malevolence that lingered just beyond. From that day forward, the red ribbon was more than just a boundary. It was a reminder of the forest's unending hunger and the fragile line between safety and oblivion. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of Anya's fate, and each autumn they renewed their vigil, ever watchful, ever wary, knowing that the forest's dark heart still beat, waiting for another soul to wander too close. In the heart of the Ural Mountains, within a village shrouded by the dense and foreboding taiga, the annual disappearances of mushroom foragers have woven a chilling tapestry of fear and mystery. Among the villagers, the tales of those who vanished have become ghost stories told in hushed tones by the fireside. Natalia Shatina, one of the village elders, often recounts these harrowing stories, her voice trembling with the weight of old sorrows. One such story is that of Afanasia Grigoryevna, a widow known for her resilience and deep knowledge of the forest. Afanasia had spent her entire life foraging, navigating the taiga with an expert's eye. But one autumn day, she ventured beyond the safety of the village's red ribbon boundary and never returned. Despite exhaustive search efforts, not a single trace of her was found. Her disappearance was the first of many, casting a long shadow over the village. Then there was the young couple, Yelena and Sergei, whose love for each other was matched only by their love for the forest. They set out on a bright autumn morning, hand in hand, laughing as they disappeared into the trees. When they failed to return by dusk, the villagers grew anxious. Search parties combed the forest, calling their names into the growing darkness, but neither Yelena nor Sergei were ever seen again. Their families were left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions, the forest having swallowed them whole. As the disappearances mounted, fear took root deeper than the oldest trees in the taiga. The villagers began to suspect that wild animals might be the culprits behind these mysterious vanishings. Wolves and bears, known to roam the forest, were considered prime suspects. Determined to protect their community, the villagers organized hunting parties to cull these predators. Shots echoed through the forest as wolves were tracked and bears were driven away. Yet, even as the population of these wild beasts dwindled, the disappearances continued unabated. The measures against the wild animals did little to quell the growing terror. The village, bound by its traditions and the forest's inexorable pull, seemed cursed. Natalia Shatina often spoke of these efforts with a grim resignation. She recalled how, despite their best efforts, the forest seemed to defy them, its mysteries deepening with each lost soul. The red ribbon boundary, initially a beacon of hope, now stood as a stark reminder of the village's precarious existence. It marked the thin line between safety and the unknown, a boundary respected by all but the most daring or desperate. And still, each autumn, the forest seemed to call out, luring the unwary beyond its blood-red line, into the depths where even the bravest feared to tread. Natalia's stories served as warnings to the younger generation, a reminder of the forest's unrelenting grasp. She spoke of Afanasia and the young couple, not just to preserve their memory, but to instill a sense of caution in those who might be tempted to test the forest's boundaries. The taiga, with its ancient trees and whispering winds, remained a place of beauty and bounty, but also one of unspeakable dread. As another autumn approached, the villagers renewed their precautions. the boundary was reinforced, and patrols were established to watch for anyone straying too close to the edge. The forest, dark and silent, loomed ever near, its mysteries as unfathomable as ever. And though the villagers had taken every measure to protect themselves, they knew deep down that the taiga's secrets remained, waiting for the next soul to venture too far into its shadowy embrace. In the remote village on the edge of the Ural taiga, the autumn air was thick with an unspoken dread. Despite the ominous tales and the village's protective measures, the allure of the forest remained strong. Natalia Shatina, an elder with a trove of chilling stories, had always approached the forest with caution. Yet, on one fateful day, she and her friend Katya decided to venture into the woods for mushrooms, a decision that would lead them to the brink of terror. Katya, ever the optimist, had convinced Natalia to join her on this foray. Natalia, though hesitant, finally agreed, seeking to support her friend and perhaps lay to rest some of her own fears. As they crossed the red ribbon boundary, Natalia couldn't shake a feeling of unease, a sense that the forest was watching, waiting. The day began uneventfully, with the two women filling their baskets with an array of mushrooms. They chatted and laughed, the forest's beauty momentarily distracting them from its sinister reputation. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, a sense of foreboding settled over Natalia. She urged Katya to turn back, but her friend, emboldened by their successful foraging, insisted on pressing further. Suddenly the forest grew eerily silent. The birds stopped singing, and the rustling of leaves ceased. Natalia's skin prickled with an unnatural chill. She looked around, realizing they had strayed far from the village, deeper into the taiga than they had intended. The trees seemed to close in around them, the path they had followed now obscured by the encroaching shadows. Then Natalia saw a flicker of movement at the edge of her vision. She turned, but nothing was there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to steady her breathing. Katya noticed Natalia's distress and suggested they head back. Relief washed over Natalia, but it was short-lived. As they retraced their steps, a strange whispering filled the air, barely audible yet undeniably there. The words were unintelligible, a haunting murmur that seemed to come from all directions. Natalia's fear escalated into panic. She grabbed Katya's arm, urging her to hurry. They began to run, the forest's whispers growing louder, more insistent. Suddenly, Katya stumbled and fell. Natalia turned to help her friend, but froze in her tracks. Standing in the shadows was a figure, indistinct and shrouded in darkness. Its eyes, glinting with an unnatural light, locked onto Natalia's. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the forest itself was reaching out to claim her. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Natalia pulled Katya to her feet, and they ran, the forest's whispers chasing them. They burst through the red ribbon boundary, collapsing in a heap just outside the village. The whispers ceased, the oppressive weight lifting as they crossed into safety. Natalia returned to the village in a state of shock. Her usual composure shattered, she was unable to immediately articulate what had transpired. She clung to Katya, her eyes wide with terror. When the villagers pressed her for details, Natalia could only hint at what she had experienced. She spoke of a presence in the forest, something beyond comprehension, something that had watched them with malevolent intent. The villagers listened in hushed silence, the fear in Natalia's voice a stark reminder of the forest's dark reputation. The red ribbon boundary, once a symbol of hope, now seemed a fragile barrier against an ancient, lurking evil. Natalia's story spread quickly, reinforcing the dread that had taken root in the village. As the nights grew longer and the autumn deepened, the villagers remained vigilant. The forest, beautiful and bountiful, had shown its true face to Natalia and Katya. And though they had escaped with their lives, the memory of that day lingered, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. The taiga, with its whispers and shadows, held secrets that no one dared to uncover. In the heart of the Ural Mountains, the small village clung to its traditions and the haunting stories of those who had vanished into the surrounding taiga. The red ribbon boundary, a stark line of demarcation, was intended to protect the villagers from whatever malevolent forces lay beyond. Yet, Despite the warnings and the tales of disappearances, curiosity and the promise of abundant mushrooms lured some to test the limits. Katya, with her unyielding spirit and sense of adventure, had often eyed the forest beyond the ribbon with a mix of curiosity and defiance. One crisp autumn morning, she proposed to her friend Natalia that they venture past the red ribbon, convinced that the best mushrooms awaited them there. Natalia, known for her caution and the weight of the stories she carried, hesitated. The tales of Afanasia Grigorievna and the young couple who had disappeared without a trace lingered in her mind. "Are you sure it's worth the risk?" Katya Natalia asked, her voice trembling with unease. "You know what they say about the forest beyond the boundary." Katya laughed softly, trying to ease Natalia's fears. "We've been fine every other time. Besides, think of the mushrooms we'll find. We'll be careful, I promise." Reluctantly, Natalia agreed, her apprehension palpable. Together they crossed the red ribbon, the crimson line fluttering ominously in the breeze as they left the perceived safety of the village behind. Almost immediately, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The forest grew denser, the shadows deeper. But then, as if to mock Natalia's fears, they stumbled upon a trove of mushrooms more than they had ever seen within the boundary. The ground was carpeted with a variety of fungi, their caps glistening with morning dew. Katya let out a delighted laugh, and the two women quickly became engrossed in their foraging. The thrill of their find momentarily banished Natalia's fears. They moved from patch to patch, filling their baskets, their spirits lifting with each new discovery. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the trees. It was then that Natalia felt the first pang of unease return. The forest, which had seemed so inviting in the morning light, now felt oppressive. She glanced around, trying to get her bearings, but the familiar landmarks were obscured by the thickening underbrush. "Katya, I think we should head back," Natalia said, her voice tinged with worry. "It's getting late." Katya, still caught up in the excitement, reluctantly agreed. "Just a few more minutes, Natalia. Look at all these mushrooms. We'll never find so many within the boundary." As they continued to forage, Natalia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest was unnervingly silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to close in around them. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but her sense of unease only grew. Finally, with their baskets overflowing, Katya conceded it was time to return. They turned back towards the village, but the path they had taken seemed to have vanished. Panic began to set in as they realized they were lost. The forest, which had seemed so bountiful and inviting, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. "Katya, we need to hurry," Natalia urged, her voice shaking. "I don't recognize anything. We need to find the ribbon." As they pressed on, the whispers began faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. Natalia's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at Katya, whose confident demeanor had begun to falter. The whispers seemed to come from all around them, unintelligible yet filled with an undeniable menace. Natalia's fear turned to terror. She grabbed Katya's arm, pulling her along faster. They stumbled through the underbrush, desperately seeking the red ribbon, the only beacon of safety in this haunted expanse. After what felt like an eternity, they burst through the trees and saw the red ribbon, fluttering in the fading light. They crossed the boundary, collapsing on the other side, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers ceased, the oppressive weight lifting as they re-entered the village's safety. Natalia and Katya returned with their baskets full, but their spirits broken. Natalia's earlier fears had been validated, and the village's stories took on a new, terrifying reality. The forest beyond the red ribbon held a darkness that defied understanding, a malevolent force that had nearly claimed them. The villagers listened intently as Natalia recounted their ordeal, her voice trembling with the memory. The red ribbon boundary, once seen as a mere precaution, now stood as a vital lifeline between safety and the unknown. Natalia and Katya's harrowing experience served as a grim reminder of the forest's dangers, reinforcing the boundary's importance and the wisdom of respecting its limits. The taiga, beautiful and bountiful, remained a place of unspeakable dread, its secrets best left undisturbed. In the secluded village on the edge of the Ural Taiga, the stories of mysterious disappearances were whispered warnings, but the call of the forest's bounty was sometimes too strong to resist. Katya, with her boundless enthusiasm, and Natalia, with her cautious nature, decided to cross the red ribbon boundary, hoping to find an abundance of mushrooms. Despite her initial reluctance, Natalia followed Katya, who was brimming with excitement at the prospect of a bountiful harvest. As they moved deeper into the forest, the ground became a veritable treasure trove of mushrooms. Katya's eyes sparkled with delight, and soon she was lost in the thrill of the hunt, oblivious to the passage of time and the distance they were covering. Natalia, though more apprehensive, soon found herself equally engrossed. The forest, with its rich scents and the satisfying crunch of leaves underfoot, drew her in. Basket after basket filled with mushrooms, their variety and abundance surpassing anything they had seen within the safety of the village boundaries. Hours slipped by unnoticed as they scoured the forest floor, the sun casting long shadows that gradually deepened. Natalia, though still wary, couldn't help but share in Katya's infectious enthusiasm. They laughed and chatted as they worked, their worries momentarily forgotten in the joy of their discovery. Eventually, their baskets were full to the brim, and they decided to rest. Sitting on a fallen log, they marveled at their haul. Katya's cheeks were flushed with excitement, and Natalia, though more reserved, couldn't hide her own sense of accomplishment. She imagined her grandmother's reaction, the pride and joy she would feel at seeing such a bountiful collection. As they rested, the forest around them began to change. The light faded, and the air grew cooler. The shadows lengthened, creeping closer with an almost tangible presence. Natalia glanced at the sky, noting the dimming light with a sense of urgency. "Katya, it's getting dark. We should head back now." Katya, still caught up in the moment, waved off Natalia's concerns. "Just a little longer, Nat. Look at all we've found. Imagine how happy everyone will be." Natalia smiled weakly, but her sense of unease grew. The forest, which had seemed so inviting and abundant, now felt alien and threatening in the encroaching darkness. "Katya, seriously, we need to go before it gets too dark to see the way back." Reluctantly, Katya agreed, and they began to gather their things. But as they stood up, the reality of their situation hit them. They had wandered far from familiar paths, and the fading light made it difficult to discern their direction. The thrill of their find was quickly overshadowed by a creeping sense of dread. They started walking, but the trees, now shrouded in twilight, all looked the same. The path they thought they had followed seemed to twist and turn, leading them deeper into the forest. Natalia's heart pounded in her chest as the oppressive silence settled around them. She glanced at Katya, whose earlier confidence was now replaced with a furrowed brow. "Which way?" Nat Katya's voice, usually so sure, now wavered with uncertainty. I think it's this way," Natalia replied, though she wasn't sure at all. They pressed on, but the forest seemed to close in on them, each step taking them further from the safety of the village. The light continued to fade, and soon they were enveloped in darkness. The forest, now a shadowy maze, offered no clues to their whereabouts. Natalia's earlier excitement was replaced by a cold, creeping fear. She thought of the stories, the warnings, and the red ribbon boundary they had so heedlessly crossed. Finally, they saw a faint glow through the trees. Hope surged through Natalia as they hurried toward the light. They broke through the underbrush and found themselves at the red ribbon boundary. Relief washed over them as they crossed back into the safety of the village. Exhausted, they collapsed on the ground, their baskets spilling mushrooms around them. The whispers and shadows of the forest seemed to recede, leaving them in the reassuring familiarity of the village. Natalia's heart still pounded as she looked back at the darkened trees, the reality of their close call sinking in. The villagers, drawn by their return, gathered around. Natalia's grandmother embraced her, tears of relief in her eyes. Natalia and Katya recounted their adventure. The excitement of their find now mingled with the sobering reminder of the forest's dangers. The red ribbon boundary, a line of fragile protection, had once again proven its worth. The taiga, with its allure and its threats, remained a place of profound beauty and deep mystery. The village, bound by its traditions and the stories of those who had vanished, understood that the forest's secrets were best left undisturbed, a lesson Natalia and Katya would not soon forget. In the remote village on the edge of the Ural taiga, the red ribbon boundary was a stark reminder of the dangers lurking within the forest. Despite the warnings and the stories of those who had disappeared, Katya's infectious enthusiasm had led her and Natalia beyond the boundary in search of mushrooms. What started as an adventure soon spiraled into a nightmare as they lost their way in the deepening forest. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, the girls realized the gravity of their situation. Their baskets were full, but so were their hearts with a growing sense of dread. "We need to find our way back," Natalia said, her voice tight with anxiety. Katya, usually so confident, nodded silently, her earlier bravado evaporating in the face of their predicament. They tried to retrace their steps, but the forest seemed to conspire against them. Every direction looked the same, each tree a mirror of the last. The path they thought they had followed was now a maze of underbrush and shadow. "I think it's this way," Katya said, pointing to what she believed was the right path. They walked for what felt like hours, but the red ribbon boundary remained elusive. The deeper they went, the more disoriented they became. Natalia's heart pounded in her chest as the oppressive silence of the forest closed in around them. They attempted to use landmarks, but the fading light made it difficult to see clearly. Their repeated efforts to find the boundary only led them in circles, the forest seemingly mocking their attempts to escape. "Maybe we should stay put and wait for help," Natalia suggested, her voice trembling. "Someone will notice we're missing and come looking for us." Katya shook her head, her frustration evident. "We can't just wait here. We need to keep trying. We'll find it eventually." But each attempt brought them no closer to safety. The trees, tall and foreboding, loomed over them, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out in the growing darkness. The forest floor, once a source of bounty, now seemed a treacherous labyrinth. Natalia felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead as their situation became more desperate. Night fell, and with it came the whispers. Faint at first, then growing louder, they seemed to come from all directions. The unintelligible murmurs filled the air, a chorus of the unseen and the unknown. Natalia's fear turned to terror as she glanced at Katya, whose wide eyes mirrored her own dread. "Did you hear that?" Natalia whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie sounds. Katya nodded, her face pale. "We need to keep moving," she urged, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her fear. They stumbled through the darkness, their movements frantic and disjointed. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, watching, waiting. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent jolts of fear through them. They called out for help, but their voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint glimmer through the trees. Hope surged through Natalia as they hurried toward the light. But as they broke through the underbrush, they found not the red ribbon boundary, but another part of the forest, even deeper and darker than before. Their hope faded, replaced by a crushing sense of despair. Exhausted and terrified, they collapsed on the forest floor. Natalia's mind raced with thoughts of the stories she had heard, the people who had disappeared without a trace. Were they destined to become just another tale whispered by the fireside? Katya's earlier determination had waned, replaced by a sobering realization of their peril. "I'm sorry, Natalia," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought we could do it." Natalia squeezed her friend's hand, her own fear mingling with a fierce resolve. "We have to keep trying," she said, though she was no longer sure of their chances. "We can't give up." With renewed, albeit fragile determination, they rose and continued their search. The forest remained indifferent to their plight, its secrets hidden in the shadows. As they pressed on, every step a battle against the encroaching darkness and their own growing despair, they clung to the hope that somehow they would find their way back to the village and the safety of the red ribbon boundary. The night seemed endless, the forest an impenetrable fortress. But they knew they had to keep moving, to keep trying, for the alternative was unthinkable. And so, with heavy hearts and trembling hands, they continued their desperate search, each step a defiance of the terror that threatened to consume them. Lost in the dense, darkening forest beyond the red ribbon boundary, Natalia and Katya were gripped by fear and exhaustion. Their repeated attempts to find the path back to their village had only led them deeper into the labyrinthine woods, increasing their anxiety with each futile effort. As the whispers of the forest grew louder and more menacing, Natalia knew they had to change their strategy. "Katya, we need to stop and think," Natalia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Wandering around in the dark is too dangerous. We need to stay put and hope someone comes looking for us." Katya, her earlier bravado shattered, nodded reluctantly. "But where should we stay?" she asked, glancing around at the seemingly endless expanse of trees. Natalia scanned their surroundings and spotted a small clearing near the edge of a steep ravine. "Over there," she pointed. "If we stay near the ravine, at least we won't wander further into the forest by accident. Plus, it might make us easier to find." They carefully made their way to the clearing and sat down, their backs against the sturdy trunks of ancient trees. The forest around them was alive with unsettling sounds, but they tried to focus on the hope that their absence would soon be noticed by the villagers. Natalia's mind raced with thoughts of her grandmother, who would surely raise the alarm when she realized they hadn't returned. Hours passed, the darkness deepening as the night wore on. The temperature dropped, and the forest seemed to grow even more foreboding. Katya shivered and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. Natalia, determined to keep their spirits up, kept a close watch on their surroundings, alert for any signs of help. Suddenly, Natalia's heart skipped a beat. In the distance, deep within the forest, she saw a faint glimmer of light. "Katya, look," she whispered urgently, pointing toward the light. "Do you see that?" Katya followed Natalia's gaze, her eyes widening with hope. "Is that a fire?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement and relief. "It must be a hunter's campfire, maybe someone who can help us." Without waiting for a reply, they both stood up, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. They cautiously made their way towards the light, careful not to lose sight of it in the thick underbrush. The forest seemed to press in around them, but the beacon of light drew them forward, a promise of safety in the overwhelming darkness. As they approached, the light grew brighter, flickering warmly through the trees. Natalia's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What if it wasn't a hunter? What if it wasn't a hunter? What if it was something else entirely? But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the possibility of rescue. When they finally reached the source of the light, they saw a small, well-tended campfire crackling in a clearing. Beside it stood a figure, silhouetted against the flames. Natalia and Katya exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with cautious hope. They stepped into the clearing, their movements slow and deliberate. "Hello," Natalia called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there? We need help." The figure turned towards them, revealing a kind, weathered face. An elderly hunter, his eyes filled with surprise and concern, stepped forward. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" he asked, his voice gruff but gentle. "It's dangerous in these woods, especially at night." Relief washed over Natalia and Katya like a wave. "We got lost while foraging for mushrooms," Katya explained, her voice breaking with emotion. "We couldn't find our way back." The hunter nodded, understanding their plight. "You're lucky I set up camp here tonight. Many have ventured into these woods and never returned." He gestured for them to sit by the fire. "Rest here for a while. I'll make sure you get back to your village safely in the morning." As they sat by the warmth of the fire, Natalia and Katya felt the tension of the night slowly ebb away. The whispers of the forest seemed to fade, replaced by the comforting crackle of the flames and the hunter's reassuring presence. They exchanged grateful looks, knowing they had narrowly escaped the forest's grasp. The hunter kept watch as they drifted into an uneasy sleep, the horrors of the night still fresh in their minds. But they knew that, come morning, they would return to the village with a tale of survival and a renewed respect for the red ribbon boundary that marked the edge of the unknown. The forest, with all its beauty and danger, would remain a place of mystery and caution, a reminder of the thin line between safety and peril. Lost in the dense forest beyond the red ribbon boundary, Natalia and Katya's situation grew increasingly dire as night fell. They had decided to stay put near a steep ravine, hoping that someone from the village would notice their absence and come looking for them. The forest around them was alive with eerie sounds, but they clung to the hope that help would arrive. As they sat shivering in the cold, Natalia suddenly noticed a faint light in the distance. "Katya, look," she whispered urgently, pointing toward the light. "Do you see that?" Katya's eyes widened with hope. "Is that a fire?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement and relief. "Maybe it's a hunter's campfire. We need to check it out." Fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, they cautiously made their way toward the light. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees casting long, sinister shadows. The light grew brighter as they approached, flickering through the thick underbrush. They hurried on, their fear and exhaustion momentarily forgotten. But as they drew closer, the light revealed not a campfire, but the dim glow of an old, decrepit wooden house. Its structure leaned precariously, as if it had stood abandoned for decades. Natalia and Katya exchanged glances, their hope mingling with trepidation. "Do you think anyone lives here?" Natalia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Katya shrugged, her determination unwavering. "There's only one way to find out." They approached the house, its wooden planks creaking ominously in the wind. Natalia knocked on the door, the sound echoing hollowly inside. They waited, holding their breath, but there was no answer. The silence was deafening. "Maybe they're asleep," Katya suggested, though doubt tinged her voice. She knocked again, harder this time, but still there was no response. Frustration and fear mounting, she tried the door handle, but it was locked. Without hesitation, Katya took a step back and kicked the door with all her might. The old wood splintered and gave way, the door swinging open with a loud creak. They peered inside, their eyes straining to see in the dim light. The interior of the house was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay. Natalia and Katya stepped inside, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "Hello," Natalia called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here? We need help." But the house remained silent. They moved cautiously through the rooms, each one empty and forlorn. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in the corners like ghostly shrouds. It was clear that no one had lived here for a long time. Katya's initial bravado began to wane as they explored the desolate house. "This place is abandoned," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment and fear. "What do we do now?" Natalia tried to remain calm, but her heart was pounding. "Let's look for anything useful," she suggested. "Maybe there's something here that can help us find our way back." They searched the house thoroughly, but found nothing of use. No maps, no food, no signs of recent habitation. The only remnants of life were old, decaying furniture and forgotten belongings, their owners long gone. As they stood in the main room, the weight of their situation settled heavily on them. The hope that had driven them to the house was replaced by a crushing sense of isolation. The forest outside seemed even more menacing, its whispers louder and more insistent. "Maybe we should stay here until morning," Katya said finally, her voice small. "At least we'll have some shelter." Natalia nodded, though she felt a gnawing fear at the thought of spending the night in the abandoned house. They gathered some old blankets they found in a closet and settled down in the corner of the main room, trying to find some semblance of comfort. The night was long and filled with eerie sounds: the creaking of the house, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Natalia and Katya huddled together, their eyes wide open, unable to sleep. As the hours dragged on, Natalia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around the dark room, the shadows playing tricks on her mind. Every creak and groan of the old house sent chills down her spine. Just as she began to doze off, a faint noise startled her awake. It was a soft, almost imperceptible sound like a whisper. She strained to listen, but the house was silent again. She shook Katya gently. "Did you hear that?" Katya, half asleep, shook her head. "Hear what?" Natalia frowned, her unease growing. "I thought I heard something, like a whisper." Katya sat up, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Maybe it's just the wind," she suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. They remained silent, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Then, there it was again, a faint, whispering sound, coming from somewhere within the house. Natalia's heart raced. "It's coming from upstairs," she whispered. "We should check it out." Katya hesitated, fear evident in her eyes, but she nodded, and together they rose, moving cautiously toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked loudly under their weight, the sound echoing through the silent house. At the top of the stairs they paused, listening. The whispering was clearer now, an eerie, unintelligible murmur that seemed to surround them. They followed the sound to a small, closed door at the end of the hallway. Natalia reached for the doorknob, her hand trembling. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, the room was empty, save for a single, flickering candle on a table in the center. The whispering ceased abruptly as they stepped inside. Katya and Natalia exchanged bewildered glances. "What is this place?" Katya whispered, her voice barely audible. Natalia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the candle. "I don't know, but I don't like it." Suddenly, the candle flickered violently, the flame stretching and twisting as if caught in an invisible wind. The whispering began again, louder this time, filling the room with its sinister presence. Natalia felt a cold chill run down her spine. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. Katya nodded, and they turned to leave. But as they reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging them into darkness. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, surrounding them on all sides. Panic surged through Natalia. She grabbed Katya's hand, desperately searching for a way out. "We have to find another way." But the room seemed to close in on them, the shadows pressing closer. The whispering turned into a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. Just when it seemed the darkness would swallow them whole, the door flew open, and they stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. The whispering ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Natalia and Katya didn't waste another moment. They ran down the stairs and out of the house, their hearts pounding with terror. They didn't stop until they were far from the cursed place, the old house fading into the distance. As they collapsed on the forest floor, gasping for breath, Natalia looked at Katya, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. We have to find our way back." Katya nodded, too shaken to speak. They rose and continued their journey, the terror of the abandoned house propelling them forward. The forest seemed even more sinister now, but they knew they had to keep going. They had to find the red ribbon boundary and the safety of their village before it was too late. Lost in the dense forest beyond the red ribbon boundary, Natalia and Katya's situation grew increasingly dire as night fell. Desperation drove them toward a faint light they hoped was a campfire, but as they neared, the light revealed not safety, but an old, decrepit wooden house. Its structure leaned precariously, as if it had stood abandoned for decades. Despite their trepidation, the hope for shelter and perhaps aid compelled them to investigate. As they approached the house, a foul stench hit them like a physical blow. The air was thick with a nauseating odor of decay, reminiscent of rotting animals. Natalia covered her nose with her sleeve, her stomach turning. "What is that smell?" she muttered, her voice muffled. Katya, grimacing, replied, "I don't know, but we need to find out if there's anyone here who can help us." Natalia knocked on the door, the sound echoing hollowly inside. They waited, holding their breath, but there was no answer. The silence was deafening, almost oppressive. Frustration and fear mounting, Katya kicked the door with all her might. The old wood splintered and gave way, the door swinging open with a loud creak. They stepped inside cautiously, the stench growing stronger. The interior was dimly lit by the flickering light of a single grimy window. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the air was thick with neglect. Natalia called out, "Hello? Is anyone here? We need help," but the house remained silent. In the main room they found a large bed, its mattress sagging and covered in a thick layer of dust. Beside it stood an old wardrobe, its doors hanging ajar. The smell seemed to emanate from the dark corners of the room. Katya moved to open the wardrobe fully, hoping to find something useful, but it was empty save for a few tattered clothes that disintegrated at her touch. "This place is abandoned," Katya said, her voice tinged with disappointment and fear. What do we do now? Natalia's eyes scanned the room, her heart pounding. Let's search the house. Maybe there's something we can use to find our way back. They moved through the house cautiously, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. Each room they entered was more decrepit than the last, filled with the detritus of a long-forgotten life. In the kitchen, they found rusted pots and pans, and the remnants of what might have once been food, now reduced to mold and rot. The smell of decay was almost unbearable. Returning to the main room, they noticed a small, half-hidden door in the corner, previously overlooked in their haste. Natalia approached it, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. She turned it slowly, the door creaking open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. A chill ran down Natalia's spine. "Katya, look," she whispered, pointing to the staircase. Katya peered over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you think we should go down there?" she asked, her voice trembling. Natalia hesitated, the oppressive sense of unease growing stronger. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." Taking a deep breath, they descended the stairs, each step creaking ominously under their weight. The air grew colder and the smell more pungent as they went deeper. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small, dank basement. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old, rotting jars of preserves. In the center of the room was a trapdoor, partially hidden under a ragged carpet. Natalia and Katya exchanged a glance, their unease palpable. "Should we open it?" Katya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Natalia nodded, though her heart pounded with a sense of impending dread. Together they moved the carpet aside and pulled open the trapdoor. A rush of even colder air hit them, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay. The darkness below was impenetrable, and they could see nothing beyond the first few steps of another staircase descending into the blackness. "We need to get out of here," Natalia said urgently, her fear reaching a crescendo. "This place is wrong. We shouldn't be here." Katya didn't need convincing. They hurried back up the stairs, their panic mounting. The house, once a potential refuge, now felt like a trap. As they reached the main room, a loud crash echoed from below, as if something heavy had fallen in the basement. They froze, their eyes wide with terror. "We have to leave," now Katya cried, her voice breaking. They rushed out of the house, the oppressive air and stench following them like a dark cloud. Once outside, they ran, not stopping until they were far from the decrepit structure. Panting and gasping for breath, they collapsed on the forest floor, their hearts racing. Natalia looked at Katya, her eyes filled with fear and determination. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "We need to find our way back. We have to find the red ribbon boundary and get back to the village before it's too late." Katya nodded, too shaken to speak. They rose and continued their journey, the terror of the abandoned house propelling them forward. The forest seemed even more sinister now, but they knew they had to keep going. The whispers of the forest and the malevolent presence of the house drove them onward, their only hope the distant promise of the red ribbon boundary and the safety of their village. As Natalia and Katya sought refuge in the basement, hoping to evade the unseen presence lurking above, they found themselves in a state of heightened anxiety. The basement, once a place of potential safety, now felt like a prison, trapping them with its oppressive atmosphere and ominous shadows. Huddled together in a corner, they listened intently, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing through the narrow passageway, drawing closer with each passing moment. Natalia's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. "We need to hide," she whispered urgently to Katya, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. Katya nodded, her eyes wide with terror. They scanned the room frantically, searching for a place to conceal themselves from whatever horror awaited them above. Their gazes landed on an old wardrobe in the corner, its doors slightly ajar. Without hesitation, they rushed to the wardrobe and squeezed inside, their bodies pressed tightly together in the cramped space. Natalia held her breath as she pushed the doors closed, praying they wouldn't creak and give away their hiding place. Outside, the footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy breathing. Natalia's hands trembled as she clasped them over her mouth, trying to stifle the fear threatening to escape in a scream. Katya clung to her, her nails digging into Natalia's arm with a desperation born of terror. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open, flooding the room with dim light. Natalia's heart leaped into her throat as she heard the sound of footsteps descending the stairs, slow and deliberate. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear into the darkness of the wardrobe. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the wardrobe. Natalia held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Through the crack in the doors, she could see a shadowy figure standing just a few feet away. A chill ran down her spine as she heard the figure mutter something unintelligible, its voice raspy and filled with malice. Natalia's grip on Katya tightened, her nails biting into her skin as they waited in terrified silence. Suddenly, the figure turned and walked away, its footsteps fading into the distance. Natalia let out a shaky breath, her heart still racing with fear. She waited for what felt like an eternity before daring to crack open the wardrobe doors and peek outside. The basement was empty, the only sound the faint echo of their own breathing. Natalia and Katya exchanged a relieved glance, their terror slowly giving way to cautious hope. But just as they began to relax, a horrifying sight greeted them. Standing in the center of the room was a grotesque figure, its hunched form twisted and contorted beyond recognition. Its skin was pallid and stretched taut over protruding bones, its eyes sunken and devoid of any humanity. In its gnarled hands, it held a scrap of flesh, its lips curled into a grotesque grin. Natalia and Katya recoiled in horror, their minds unable to comprehend the sight before them. They watched in stunned silence as the figure shuffled closer, its gaze fixed on them with a hunger that sent shivers down their spines. Without a word, they turned and fled, their footsteps echoing through the empty house as they raced toward the safety of the forest outside. But the memory of the horrifying figure would haunt them long after they escaped, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the darkness, waiting to devour those who dared to venture too far from safety. In the dimly lit basement of the decrepit house, Natalia and Katya found themselves confronted with horrors beyond comprehension. As they cowered in the darkness of the wardrobe, hoping to evade the unseen presence that lurked above, their hearts pounded with terror and their minds reeled with fear. Suddenly, their sanctuary was shattered by the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Natalia's breath caught in her throat as the basement door creaked open, revealing a grotesque figure, a hunched old woman, gnawing on her own hand, her eyes wild with madness. Natalia and Katya stifled screams of horror as they beheld the horrifying sight before them. The old woman's twisted form seemed to defy all reason, her ragged clothing hanging loosely from her emaciated frame. The stench of decay filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Frozen in terror, Natalia and Katya watched as the old woman shuffled closer, her gaze fixed on them with an unsettling intensity. The sight of her mutilated hand sent waves of revulsion coursing through them, and they recoiled in horror, their minds struggling to comprehend the nightmarish reality unfolding before their eyes. As the old woman drew nearer, Natalia and Katya were overwhelmed by a sense of dread unlike anything they had ever experienced. Their instincts screamed at them to flee, but they remained rooted to the spot, unable to tear their eyes away from the horrifying spectacle before them. Just as the old woman reached out to grab them, a sudden noise startled them awake from their nightmare. Natalia gasped, her heart pounding in her chest as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. The dim light of the basement cast eerie shadows on the walls, and for a moment she was unsure if she was still trapped in the terrifying world of her dreams. But as her senses slowly returned to her, Natalia realized that she was indeed awake, and the horrors she had witnessed were all too real. With a shudder of revulsion, she turned to Katya, who lay beside her, her face pale with fear. "It was just a dream," right? Katya whispered, her voice trembling. Natalia nodded, though her heart still raced with terror. "Just a dream," she repeated, trying to convince herself as much as her friend. But even as she spoke the words, Natalia knew deep down that the horrors they had witnessed were far from imaginary, and as they huddled together in the darkness of the basement, surrounded by the echoes of their own fear, they realized that their nightmare was far from over. As Natalia and Katya huddled together in the darkness of the basement, the fear of being discovered by the grotesque old woman weighed heavily upon them. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement outside the wardrobe filled them with a sense of impending doom. Yet amidst the terror, a glimmer of hope burned within them, a desperate belief that somehow, someway they would find a way to escape the nightmare that had become their reality. But their fragile hope was shattered when they stumbled upon the horrifying truth hidden within the depths of the decrepit house. As they cautiously ventured into the main room, their eyes fell upon the sight of the old woman lying motionless on the bed, her twisted form a chilling reminder of the horrors they had witnessed. And as they turned their gaze to the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, their worst fears were realized. A grim tableau of death and decay greeted them, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. Natalia and Katya recoiled in horror, their minds struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the atrocities they had uncovered. The sight of the lifeless bodies strewn about the chamber filled them with a sense of dread so profound that it threatened to consume them whole. With trembling hands and racing hearts, they knew that they could not stay a moment longer in this house of horrors. Without a word, they turned and fled, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls as they raced toward the safety of the forest outside. But even as they ran, the specter of death loomed large in their minds, haunting them with its silent menace. Each breath was a struggle, each step a battle against the suffocating weight of fear and despair. And yet, amidst the chaos and confusion, a single thought burned bright within them, a determination to survive, no matter the cost. With every ounce of strength they possessed, they pushed forward, driven by the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, they would find a way to escape the darkness that threatened to consume them. After their harrowing escape from the horrifying underground chamber, Natalia and Katya found themselves lost in the vast expanse of the taiga, haunted by the lingering memories of the horrors they had witnessed. As they trudged through the dense forest, each step weighed down by the weight of fear and despair, they clung to the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow they would find their way back to safety. Their salvation came in the form of a glimmer of red amidst the sea of green, a ribbon of crimson tied around a tree, marking the boundary of the forest. Relief flooded through them as they realized they were nearing the edge of the woods, their spirits buoyed by the prospect of escape from the nightmare that had become their reality. Emerging from the depths of the taiga, Natalia and Katya found themselves back in the familiar surroundings of their village, the warmth of home beckoning them with open arms. They were greeted by the comforting embrace of their grandmother and the concerned faces of the villagers, who had feared the worst during their disappearance. Their grandmother's prayers of thanks to the heavens for their safe return washed over them like a balm, soothing their frayed nerves and easing the lingering trauma of their ordeal. But even as they basked in the safety of their homecoming, a sense of unease gnawed at the edges of their consciousness, a nagging reminder of the horrors they had left behind in the depths of the forest. It was Natalia who broke the uneasy silence that settled over the village in the wake of their return, her voice tinged with a steely determination born of survival. She proposed the construction of a tall fence topped with barbed wire around the perimeter of the village, a barrier to ward off the threats that lurked beyond the safety of its borders. Her suggestion was met with puzzled looks and murmurs of confusion from the villagers, who struggled to comprehend the sudden urgency of her plea. But Natalia remained resolute, her conviction unwavering as she rallied support for her plan, driven by the knowledge that the dangers they had faced in the forest were all too real. And so, amidst whispers of superstition and skepticism, the construction of the fence began, a tangible symbol of the villagers' newfound awareness of the dark forces that lurked in the shadows of their world. As the first posts were hammered into the ground and the barbed wire stretched taut against the sky, Natalia couldn't help but wonder if perhaps the tales of monsters and demons that had haunted their dreams might hold more truth than anyone dared to believe.